All right. It looks like this is working. Just give me like 10 or 15 seconds. Hopefully we will get started shortly. Again, we'll get started shortly. All right, if you are watching on TikTok, today we're going to be talking about abortion. I'm going to go through a few things before we get started. But first, I just got to make sure I've got everything set up correctly. So just give me a couple of minutes here. All right. So for those who are joining on TikTok Live, feel free to request up. Today we'll be talking about the issue of abortion. Just a few things before we get started. The information in this video has not been fact-checked. General goals are going to be to have peaceful, respectful conversations about the issue. I'm not going to try to be overly combative or confrontational, though obviously if we disagree, then I'm going to explore that disagreement. I haven't done open online debates in a while, so I'm just trying to get a feel for it, so I'm not going to be pushing super hard. Again, the prompt is, what do you think about abortion? In particular, I'm looking for people who disagree with me. I'm pro-life, so I'm looking for people who are pro-choice. Obviously, only request up if you are an adult, so you have to be over the age of 18 to request up, so please don't request up if you are not an adult. With that said, I think we are good to go ahead and start the conversations. For those watching on YouTube, try to let me know in the chat if you can hear the other person. In the last live stream, I know that you guys had an issue where you were not able to hear those who were joining as guests, so do let me know if you can hear them. All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me? How old are you?
I'm 18.
Okay. And what's your position on abortion?
Um, I'm pro-life, I guess. I support abortion. I don't think there's a problem with it.
So
I
you
don't think
don't
it's
believe.
inherently a problem with it. I don't think there's inherently a problem with abortion.
Okay, so you're pro-choice then.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, why don't you think there's anything wrong with abortion?
Because I think that there's no right or wrong. Really, when it comes to morals, I think morals are subjective, and also I think that like whether you value a fetus or not, is kind of based off of your emotions, and I don't really think you control them. Like at the base of it, what do you think?
Okay. Just to clarify, do you think that murder in general is wrong? Like if someone was to kill a born person, do you think that would be wrong?
I don't think it's inherently wrong, but I definitely feel wrong about it. Like subjectively, it's wrong to me. Yeah,
And presumably you think it should be illegal to murder a born person, right? You think it should be against the law?
yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I can just lay out my position just so that you're aware of it. My position is essentially pro life from conception. So I believe that we should protect all human beings equally. Since the unborn are human from conception, I think they should be equally protected under law.
Okay. Do you disagree with my point, and why?
Um, well, I guess I want to clarify a little bit because I'm kind of a little confused. So you agree with me that should be wrong to kill a born person, according to the law. I know you said you don't necessarily think that there's like objective morality, but according to the law, you think that should be wrong. So what would be the reasoning for not extending that to the preborn?
I don't feel value towards a fetus. For example, like one reason would be that I don't have experience with them. I don't really have relation to a fetus at all. And I think that it's less of logic when it comes to like whether you value something or not, and more so feelings like your upbringing and somewhat genetics.
Okay, but
Understand?
yeah, but I mean, presumably, if you saw someone who was a white supremacist and said that they didn't interact with black people and they didn't really have relationships with them, you'd still think that they were probably wrong for thinking it should be okay to murder black people, right?
Yeah, I disagree with that. Yeah, I feel wrong about that. I'm not gonna say it's objectively wrong.
Yeah, but like, what would be the argument that would convince him? Because he doesn't feel wrong about that. And you mentioned that we shouldn't be basing this on logic necessarily, but on feelings. But feelings can be quite misguided, right?
Yeah, so generally white supremacists, they're illogical when it comes to their beliefs. So generally you can debate them on that. I don't think white supremacy is like really a valid logical endpoint. So I don't think emotions would like be a valid reason to be a white supremacist. Because a lot of people are confused. White supremacists, a lot of them think they're doing the right thing when they're illogical.
Yeah, but so we shouldn't be basing this stuff on feelings. Then we should be basing it on logic, correct?
No. So when it comes to abortion, uh, like if it's since it's like acceptable, I don't really have a problem with like fetuses dying.
But why is it acceptable?
Because like a lot of people are pro-life or pro or okay with abortion.
Yeah, but
Like,
there was a time like 200 years ago when a lot of people were okay with enslaving black people, but you still think that's wrong, right?
yeah, I have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with abortion. Like emotionally, I don't have any problems with it.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be basing whether something's right or wrong on majority then, though, right?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that's the reason. Like that's part of the reason I have no problem with it because I wasn't brought up to have a problem with it.
Okay, so like, why don't you think there's anything wrong with it?
I don't. I'm not saying I don't. I think it. I don't think it's like object. I don't think it's objectively right to have abortion. But I'm saying that I don't feel wrong with it. So I don't think people can tell me that I should be against abortion. Understand?
But then why can you tell people who want to own slaves that they're wrong? If people can't tell you that you're wrong,
Yeah,
how can you tell them? Go ahead.
I'm not telling them they're wrong. So yeah, I'm not like 100% like pro life. I just said that because it's
You mean
like
pro-choice?
easy way to explain it. I'm like kind of in the middle. So, but I personally lean like I personally feel value towards the fetus. But when you say you're pro life, you kind of advocate for abortions, which I don't really do. I'm kind of like in the middle.
No, so
You understand?
pro-life would mean that I'm against abortion.
Yeah, like personally, I'm against abortion, but I don't. I wouldn't make that decision for other people. So I didn't want you to be confused. You understand?
Okay. So
Okay.
let me just make sure I've got this correct. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like you're saying you're personally against abortion, but you wouldn't want to impose that view on other people. Is that correct?
No, I'm personally for abortion. I'm fine with it. And I wouldn't impose that view on other people.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so why do you think that it would be wrong for someone to murder a child who was just born, say, a minute ago? So now we have a newborn infant. Why would it be wrong to murder that child, but not, say, a week before the child was born?
I feel really bad about taking like a kid's life or baby's life because I have like relations to them. I was brought up to think that's terrible. Genetically, humans value other humans or social animals.
So it's just kind of based on how you were raised.
It's partly how I was raised, partly genetics. Like genetics and experience is kind of what morality is made up of.
Okay, so I mean, you wouldn't accept that. I mean, if you were in my position, right, you wouldn't really accept that argument as valid, just like you wouldn't if someone said that just because the way that they were brought up in a racist household, and therefore they think racism is acceptable. You would probably want them to provide a better justification than just that's what they were raised with, right?
Well, I think racism's kind of illogical, like when it comes to that. But I think when it comes to abortion, I think that it's like I think that since it's like acceptable, I think it's fine for me to not support it. And I think that like maybe one of the things that I feel value towards is the intelligence of the fetus, and also like the connections that I have to it. Whether I don't really have connections to a fetus, but I do to like a baby.
Okay, so I think one thing that might be helpful here is you said that racism is illogical. So I would just like to know, like, why do you think the pro-life position is illogical?
Is logical.
Is illogical?
Oh yeah, pro life. Yeah. I don't think it's like necessarily illogical. I'm just saying that I don't think there's an inherent right or wrong when it comes to pro life, and I don't feel value towards the fetus. Therefore, I am pro abortion, I guess.
Okay, and why don't you feel any value to the fetus, but you do to newborn infants?
Partly because it's unintelligent. I understand that that's part of babies are unintelligent too. Mainly because I don't have connection to it. I would say.
Yeah,
It's kind of hard to explain where your emotions come from, though. So, like, but I think that's the main reason.
okay. Why should we be relying on emotions here, though? Shouldn't we be relying on logic?
Well, I think morality's when it comes to this, like at the bottom of it, when you have your logic straight, I think that like it kind of is based off emotion, like your morality. Do you understand?
I'm just curious, what's wrong with my logic that we protect all human beings equally, including those out of the womb and those that are in the womb? What's wrong
No,
with
I'm
my
not saying
logic?
there's anything wrong with your logic. I'm just saying that you feel differently than me
No,
because of
but
your logic. But I understand your logic, I'm fairly sure that I do, and I don't feel value towards a fetus.
okay, but what would you say to someone who was white or some other skin color and said that they just personally don't feel a value towards people of a certain color or race?
I would ask them why, and if they got to a logical endpoint where it's just like, I just don't feel value towards another race, uh, and like there's like logic behind it, but they just happen to not feel it, then you can't really do much. Like I don't know, like what do you mean?
Well, just I mean, in this conversation on my end, it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of reasoning beyond lacking a relationship with them.
Yeah, I think that's my main reason. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to be able to necessarily change your mind, but I appreciate you stepping up to have the conversation. Is there anything you want to ask me before we wrap up?
Let me see. So do you think it's like morals are inherent? Like, do you think it's inherently wrong to unalive a fetus?
Yeah, I believe that morality is objective, not subjective.
Yeah. So that does that come from your religion or logic or both?
Um, I would say religion, Christianity. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think morality being objective is your argument for like do you think that's essential for your argument for abortion, or do you think that?
I think it's not only essential for my argument on abortion, but I also think it's essential for an argument that says it should be illegal to murder born humans.
All right. So if your objective morality is essential for your argument on abortion, Then do you think that political figures should include Christianity in their lawmaking to ban abortion?
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that we can't really live in well, let me rephrase that. Uh, every nation, every country is going to have a God. Everyone's going to worship someone or something. And so if there's no God above the state, if the state says there is no God above us, Christ didn't live a perfect life, died on the cross for sins, there is no God, well, then the state becomes God. So my political position would essentially be that we ought to have legislators who are legislating in accordance with biblical teachings and biblical values.
Really, I feel like atheists have very similar values to Christians. Like, there's no like evidence showing like atheists are way more immoral than Christians.
Well, what standard are you judging the atheist by, though, is the problem.
Just like regular people who identify as atheists and regular
Yep.
people who identify as Christians, not Christians who follow the Bible perfectly.
Yeah, I just mean if someone was to say that atheists behave just as morally as Christians, they have to have a standard for what moral behavior is.
Oh, like what is generally considered moral, like protecting humans, like being kind, respectful. I think these are common things for morality.
Wouldn't like protecting
Like, I think there's a consensus.
wouldn't protecting like the human rights of all human beings be something that should probably be included in sort of the standard that we're judging atheists and Christians by?
No, that's actually kind of controversial when you apply it to abortion. But I think there's like generally people understand what you mean when you say moral or not.
Okay. Do you think that it's possible that your sampling of atheists might be particularly from the West, and in particular in countries where Christians have kind of shaped moral teachings within that society for a significant period of time until recently, say like last 100 years?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. Anything else you want to ask me before we wrap up?
No, that was about it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for talking. All right, so just a quick reminder before I accept the next guest, looking for people who are going to be respectful, not looking for anything that's hyper competitive. And if you're joining just to insult, please don't do that. So just try to keep it respectful. How old are you?
This year, I feel like they're probably
How old are you?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. How old are you?
I'm 22.
Okay. What do you think about abortion?
I think if I was a pregnant woman, I probably wouldn't have an abortion personally. But I don't think it's something that should be illegal to do.
Okay. Why, if you were someone who is pregnant, would you not have an abortion?
Um, well, I'm assuming I would have I would have gotten pregnant by somebody I was in love with, somebody that I'd be willing to start a family with, and that's something I do want to do, have children in the future. So it just wouldn't be aligned with my goals to have an abortion,
Okay.
but it could reasonably be so for somebody else.
Gotcha. Let me just throw something out there. Curious to get your thoughts on it. If let's just say, just to clarify, are you a guy or a girl? I'm assuming you're a guy, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So if let's just suppose you're a girl or whatever, you got pregnant, and then your boyfriend unfortunately died in an accident or something. Suddenly you'd kind of be lacking in the support and maybe the initial vision that you had for the pregnancy moving forward. In that case, do you think that you would still want to carry through with the pregnancy, or would you consider abortion in that case?
I would definitely consider it more, but I don't know. I have a strong support system myself. I mean, it's still possible. I think that somebody could be in that situation and decide to have a child still.
Okay. But to clarify then, it doesn't sound like you have like a personal moral objection to abortion, correct?
Not like a general one, I guess.
Okay. I can just lay out my position just so that you're aware of it. So I'm pro-life from conception. I believe that all human beings should have equal rights under the law. I am curious, what's kind of the reasoning for saying that it should be illegal to murder a born human, but it should be legal to murder the preborn. Like, why draw that distinction there?
I think we're gonna generally draw that distinction, right, because of the context that the abortion is taking place in, right? This is a pregnant woman who is pregnant with the fetus. Obviously, the fetus is only surviving, and it would only be dying in virtue of it being removed from the woman's body, right? Whereas normally when you go out and just take someone's life in a way that we consider to be unjustified, it's not the case that you're doing this to remove them from your body. It's usually not the case that you have to do that. And I think for that reason, generally, it's going to be different. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So to clarify, would your position essentially be that abortion should be legal up until viability?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay. So I am curious. There's roughly about 4.5 to 5,000 abortions that are at 21 weeks or later every year in the U.S. Would you consider like all of those, which depending on like the state and the hospital, some of those children would be viable, some wouldn't, just due to different hospitals having different technology to be able to keep children alive at different stages of development. Would you say that, those hundreds or thousands of abortions where the child is viable, those would be instances of murder there? At least they should be under law, even if they aren't right now.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty fair. If someone can remove the fetus from their body in a non-lethal manner, and that's, readily available to them, then yeah, I think they're legally obligated to do that if they're seeking a removal. I couldn't
Okay.
say any otherwise, yeah.
Gotcha. So it kind of sounds to me like you think what makes someone a person would be being viable apart from the use of someone else's body. Is that correct?
No, I'm not really saying anything about being a person. It's more about, what force you're allowed to use in virtue of certain contexts, right? It's not that the fetus becomes a person at viability. It's just that at viability, this new manner of force becomes available that is no longer lethal, right? And whenever you're using force on somebody in the protection of your own rights, you're not entitled to just all sorts of force. You have to use the necessary force, or the force that is the least harmful on that other party. And at this point, after viability, a non-lethal force becomes available, so that means of force, therefore, is the one you're obligated to use.
Okay. And to clarify, it sounds like your position would essentially be on the basis of bodily autonomy then, correct?
Sure.
Okay. So, I mean, if I can come up with like a bunch of situations and happy to get into them if you want me to, but where a mother or an individual, in particular, we can just use mother because that's probably the closest analogy here, where a mother is the only person who's able to care for a newborn infant, particularly her newborn infant. In those situations where she has to use her body to support her child, do you think she should be required by law to do so?
Yeah, I think if you opt into being the guardian of a child legally, yeah, you do incur some obligations there, right? The point is, though, that you consented to that relationship, right? So, yeah, even in a context where somebody who consented to this relationship winds up in this scenario where their child needs them and them only, I think they have those duties at that point. But it's because they understood that was a possibility and they consented to that. Right. Whereas if you're pregnant, you might have understood this as a possibility, becoming pregnant. I'm sure a lot of women who become pregnant obviously do, but it's not the case that they've ever consented to those specific duties to me, right? Or they're ready to be a parent, simply because they've had sex and they got pregnant. So I don't think we have the authority or we should have the authority there to force that onto them.
Okay, so I'm going to give a hypothetical. It's not meant as a gotcha or anything, but I think it's helpful to kind of help reason through this. If a woman didn't know that she was pregnant, she went and visited a cabin in Minnesota or Michigan in the UP, somewhere where it snows a lot, and she gets snowed in, and then she gives birth, and she never knew she was pregnant, so she never had an opportunity to get an abortion. And say that state troopers can't get to her for 2 weeks. Should she be obligated to use her body to care for the child, such as through breastfeeding and things like that?
Legally speaking, if you mean in the sense where she would be, you think she should be charged with murder if she doesn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I could say that, how I could get behind that, right? And I guess let me ask, do you think that obligation for you, do you think it would change if, let's say, instead of a child, she stumbled upon, a homeless person in a cabin in the woods, and she had the same ability, to sustain this person with her own resources? Do you think she has that duty to them?
That duty to them? If it doesn't come at like a great cost to herself, then like, yes. Like, I think a better comparison, and I'm not trying to like dodge, but I think this is more helpful,
No.
would be if she found someone else's child, because generally children are going to be more dependent than adults. But I guess you could even use an adult who, say, is dependent, say someone who is physically
Right.
impaired in some way to where maybe they can't feed themselves. If she's
Sure.
got an abundance of food in the cabin that can support both her and the individual who may have some disabilities, I would say, yeah, for like those 7 to 14 days, she would have some obligations to that individual, such as providing that basic care, such as helping to feed the person.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty. I mean, I obviously understand the moral intuitions there, but if we're going to the extent to say you should be charged with murder if you go into a cabin in the woods, where you're about to go camping, I guess, and you stumble upon somebody who's like homeless, and now they need your resources to live, you should be charged with murder if you don't decide to help that person. I mean, what principle is this stemming from? It sounds like to me you're just saying in the case where somebody might need your resources to live, you have an obligation to give them your resources, or else you're going to be charged with murder. I mean, this is setting up, to me, it seems like this is setting up forced organ donation. I mean, just a plethora of very unintuitive things in the legal space.
Yeah,
So
so
that's
I don't
why,
think, just to clarify, I don't think it sets up forced organ donations. Like the scenario I mentioned would be like something like basic care, like helping to feed someone with disabilities. Say someone lacks
Mhm.
arms and can't, put their food in their mouth. You're stuck with that person for 7 to 14 days. I think it's reasonable to say that you can provide the basic care to the person. But I think the more closer analogy to abortion and the issue of, women being forced to use their bodies to care for their children would be the one where it is a woman who is unknowingly pregnant. And I think under your ethical framework here, your position would essentially say that if she's unknowingly pregnant and she gives birth, she can then neglect that child to death.
well, neglect, right? That word's assuming that there's a duty she's neglecting, right? That's what I'm challenging here. And then I want to respond a little bit to what you just said too about reasonable care. Okay, you said, well, no, there's no forced organ donation, right? That's stemming from the principles I'm proposing here, because you're only obligated to use your own body or resources to give that to other people to a reasonable extent. What are you classifying as reasonable or basic, care? How do we distinguish those? What's the line you're drawing in the sand? I mean, it seems like that's just going to be arbitrary to me,
So
right?
I don't think it is. And presumably you agree with neglect laws for born children, even if you draw a line about opting in versus not opting in. But basic care that all of us need to survive would include pregnancy, right? So parents being required by neglect laws to provide their children with shelter, food, clothing, those are simply basic elements of the care that all human beings need in order to survive. And so that's essentially all I'm doing is I'm just applying that standard of basic care, which I think would obviously have to include pregnancy because it's something that all of us go through. It's something that all of us need. It's not something that's extraordinary or disproportionate in any way.
Well, when it comes to a stranger, because you said this, your ethics would also apply to strangers. I would have
Not
to
in the
be.
same
I
way.
would be.
Not in the same way. So like I think that parents have obligations to their children that they don't have to strangers. But I also think that all of us can have some obligations to others depending on the circumstances. But they would differ from the obligations parents to have to their children.
Well, I just want to know to what extent, to what extent are random people, entitled to my body or my resources because they require them to live.
Yeah, I think so. This would essentially get into like Good Samaritan laws, which I think frankly is like a different topic than abortion. That's why, like in the analogy I initially made, I tried to make it the woman's child, because essentially the argument that I'm making is the basis of parental responsibilities, what parents owe to their children. The questions of like what obligations I have to someone who is not my child, who is unrelated in different situations, would essentially be a question of Good Samaritan laws. Like what obligations do I have to help someone else who's unrelated to me, who I don't have a responsibility for? But the argument that I'm kind of trying to point towards is that if we're going to say that we should enforce neglect laws and that parents have responsibilities to their children, then that should extend in the womb, because the child in the womb is also a child to the mother and father.
Well, I think neglect laws, like I said before, stem from you accepting a legal guardianship over another person, right? Whether they're your child biologically or not. I don't think the state should ever force anybody to be the parent of another person, right? That would be, for me, that would just be forced labor. That would be slavery, right? And I think, somebody who's a constitutionalist, I'm very concerned with that. I don't think the government should ever force you to have duties. I think you instead opt into those duties when you decide, hey, I want to be a parent of this child. I want to be the legal guardian. At that point, you can be charged with neglect because those duties are being neglected, the ones that you consented to. I wouldn't just force them on
So what
somebody.
happens in your ideal sort of scenario here if both the father and the mother say that they are not going to opt in?
Then in that instance, the child would be put up for adoption or would go to a foster home.
Okay, and if no one adopts the child, then they're put into state care, and all of us are then forced to be responsible for it. So it seems kind of odd to me to say, like, we have two people who in 99% of scenarios are clearly the two actors who are responsible for the creation of the child, and yet they can opt out. But everyone else in society who had no bearing on whether this child came into existence, they can't opt out. It seems weird to say that the two actors who are primarily responsible get to opt out, but people who are unrelated to the scenario don't get to.
Well, via tax, you're right. They wouldn't be able to opt out entirely from that. I mean, and I think there are problems with tax too. In a perfect world, I probably would be against tax, but we're not there. So I'm not upset with the adoption or foster system that much at the moment. I think it is a very flawed system, obviously, just for other reasons. But I don't think you're seriously saying, Hayden, that children should not be allowed to be put up for adoption or put in foster homes, and that we should force people to take care of children even if they don't want to, right?
No, I'm not saying that, but I do think that I do think though that if parents give birth to a child and there's an absence of alternatives, they are responsible for carrying that child. So like a good way to think about this would be, let's say that you have a woman who's in the same situation of the snowstorm, but a week ago she knew she was pregnant, she gave birth, she's opted in, under sort of your reasoning here. So she's opted into parenthood. Okay, now let's say that after opting into parenthood, she decides that she wants to give the child up for adoption. But there's then a 1 to 2 week period where she's stuck in the snowstorm where that can't happen. So there's an absence of alternatives. In that scenario, the woman is presumably obligated to continue caring for the child until responsibility can be safely transferred to a third party. And so if you applied that to pregnancy, she would be responsible for caring for the child until that responsibility can be safely transferred to a third party, such as after birth.
I mean, that would be correct if I did believe you began that relationship at pregnancy. But the issue is, I mean, when people have, I don't know when that would begin, right? When you give birth to a child and decide to take them home or decide to be, to adopt a child, it's clear that they're making a choice to be the guardian of that individual, right? I don't know where along the lines of someone, having intercourse and getting pregnant, that there's a clear decision that they've made to be a guardian that we could point to and say they've accepted that.
The act of intercourse, wouldn't that constitute
No,
implicit
because
consent? Why don't you think that would constitute implicit consent?
Because a child doesn't even exist yet. How could they be consenting to taking care of a child who doesn't even exist yet?
Because it's the natural consequence of their actions. So like a good way to think about it would be if I was to go play baseball in someone's backyard and there's a bunch of suburban townhomes in the surrounding area within like 100 feet, and I go crush a strike right down the middle and it goes sailing into someone's window, I implicitly consented to being responsible for paying for the damages when I made the decision to swing at the strike and send the ball sailing into the window. And so, like, in the same way, the natural consequence of intercourse between a male and a female is procreation. It doesn't happen every time, but it's something that can happen. And everyone knows that, really, when they're having intercourse. And so I think it's pretty fair to say that they implicitly consented to parenthood and to the responsibility of caring for offspring when they engaged in the sex act.
I don't really think that's how consent works. Consent is a relationship you have with another person or a party. It's not a relationship you can have with an abstract, idea like an outcome, right? And I think there's a lot of issues that befall that, right? Like, we could say, for example, that there's a risk going to a bar, you can get drugged, right? Does that mean that somebody who walks into the bar knowing that's a risk is implicitly consenting to getting drugged? I mean, that's the kind of thing that would befall someone with that logic, right? No, I don't think that's how consent
I don't
works.
think it would, though. I don't think it would, though, because there's an actor who's acting with malice there, whereas there's not an actor who's acting with malice in the case of two people who are having intercourse and conceive a child.
Okay, well, even if you take a malice, I don't know how that's really relevant. Let's just say instead that getting into my car, I know it's a possibility that I could end up in a terrible accident and then die brutally. Am I consenting to that by stepping into my car? That doesn't seem like a very intuitive understanding of consent. That's all I'm saying, Christian. I think consent is better.
To clarify, though, by that logic, wouldn't you then say that the person who crushed the baseball into someone's window has no responsibility for paying for that?
No, I would simply say you have responsibility for paying for damages when you destroy someone's property. That's how we understand that situation. It has nothing to do with consent. We just say, as a principle, when you destroy someone's property or cause harm to it, you have a duty to compensate them. It has nothing to do with consent.
And when
if you did it accidentally,
when you conceive a child, don't you have responsibility for caring for them?
Well, that's your perspective. We're trying to understand that. I haven't gotten there yet, but I don't think so. I don't think by conceiving a child you have a magical duty to that child specifically.
Okay, but if there's no duty on the part of the parents, why would there be a duty on the part of the populace? It seems like a consistent treatment of your principle of responsibility here would say that no one can be held responsible for caring for children.
How does that follow? I'm confused.
Because if the parents don't have a responsibility, why do I?
Okay, so via tax you're referring to again, right? Like I said before, I don't think tax is a perfect system. I think ideally we would have a system like this instead, where people consent to donating to charities that take care of children when their parents decide not to be the guardian, right? I think I would prefer those systems be private.
What if no one decides to donate?
If no one decides to donate, I don't think we should force anybody to do anything. That's taking care of another person, at least by a government. Ideally, that would not be my principle. But I mean, I'm still. If you agree that this is a different type of relationship with children than strangers, why? That's what I'm trying to understand from your view.
Yeah. So I mean, I had no part in the creation of another human being that's not my offspring, and so I have different obligations to them than I would a child who I was responsible for conceiving.
Why?
Because I have a different relationship to my child than I do to someone else. I didn't create someone else that is in a vulnerable, independent position, but I did when it comes to my child, right? So if I have a child, I'm voluntarily creating the conditions in which someone who is going to be completely dependent upon me and the mother, right, people who are taking care of the child, when I engage in that act. But someone who's, sees me on the sidewalk, I did nothing to place them into a dependent position.
I mean, could you think of an example outside of pregnancy where this would matter to you, where like putting someone in a dependent position would incur some special obligation towards them?
Yeah. So I think that if someone was to so from my understanding, this isn't what happens under our current laws, but I would actually support changing laws so that this would take place. If someone was to go intentionally try to murder me, so they try to kill me, I'm then placed in like a dependent state. They like stabbed me or something, and I have an organ that is failing, and the state goes through due process. This individual gets convicted. They exhaust all their appeals processes, and suppose that they have the only organ that can be used to save my life. I think it actually would be justified for the state to say, we're going to take the organ of the person who tried to kill me and give it to me, because if they don't do that, then I die. And I think in a just society that someone who murders someone else should get the death penalty. So in that case, they're saving both lives. So I think it would be justified in that scenario for that individual to be forced to donate their organ to me.
Notice there's something very different about this answer than what's happening in a pregnancy, right? You're put in this state because someone attempted to murder you. I'm assuming they assaulted you very greatly, correct?
Yeah, they placed
mean,
me
do
in
you
a
think-
dependent state as a result of their actions.
Well, by harming you, they harmed you. But you don't think that a pregnant woman is harming a child by creating them?
No, but she is
Right.
placing the child in a dependent condition, and she's directly.
Well, can you think of
responsible for that.
Can you think of a dependent condition that is not the result of harm outside of pregnancy? Because it seems like this is, only regarding pregnancy then to me.
No, there's definitely states of dependency that are outside of pregnancy and situations of malice, like the case that I mentioned. Like you can have someone who's just born with some sort of a birth defect or ailment or disease that causes them to be in a dependent state where they're dependent upon the care of others in order to survive. And it's not the fault of anyone, assuming that the mother didn't do something like ingest drugs during pregnancy or something like that.
So you think we are obligated to this person that has a disability in virtue of them having the disability?
So let's just say that I was born with some disease or some birth defect where I need an organ, and it's the same situation where I can only get it from some other individual who has like the unique matching one or whatever. In that case, I don't think the individual should be forced by the state to give to me, because they didn't do anything to place me in that dependent condition, which is different from pregnancy and the situation of attempted murder I mentioned previously.
Yeah, I'm asking if there's a situation where you put someone in a state of dependency and that this is not as a result of pregnancy or as a result of harming that person. And you think is there a case like this in the real world to you?
Okay, so just to clarify, putting someone in a state of dependency, not them being dependent naturally, like the situation I mentioned.
Right.
I mean, you could think of situations where like it's a genuine accident and something wasn't done with intent. So like say that someone constructs a deck and they somehow forget to like put a couple screws in, and then someone goes out on the deck and it falls and the person gets hurt. I mean, I guess you could come up with like a scenario like that, but.
Yeah, but in all these scenarios, in your case where there's an attempted murder, the only like intuition I have regarding an obligation stems from the fact that you cause harm to this person. Again, even if it is an accident, like I said earlier, if you harm someone or if you damage their property, it makes sense for you to have an obligation there. You have to compensate that person for those things, right? But when I'm creating a child, I haven't done anything like that. I haven't put this child into a worse state than they were previously. So I couldn't account for any obligation in the same way. And I think that's a reflection of your view not really being, plausible. It's not really reflecting anything that we normally see, where you have this weird sort of duty to somebody, right? And that's why you're giving me all these scenarios that involve harm or some sort of thing that needs to be compensated.
Okay, let's suppose that this hypothetical is a little bit out there, but it might be somewhat helpful. Suppose you had like a gold creating machine. So like you press a button and it creates a gold bar 9 out of 10 times. But 1 out of 10 times it creates a 3-year-old toddler or a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. Would you have any obligations to the newborn infant that is created 1 out of 10 times when you press the button?
I don't think you have any more obligation than you would have over a fetus. No, I don't think this scenario is really different enough to help us decide whether your principle is one that applies on a broad level, or one that is intuitive outside of this scenario of you creating somebody. Um, I don't think I can think of any scenario where I'm putting someone in a state of dependency and that incurs some obligation towards them, except like you were giving scenarios where I've harmed somebody or caused, I don't know, damage to their property
So
in
just to
some way.
clarify, with like the button pressing thing, you think that if you press the button and you knew beforehand that it had, say, like a 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 chance of it being a newborn child, you think you don't have any moral obligations to that child, it would be acceptable to neglect them, resulting in their demise?
Well, again, neglect, when the word neglect assumes that you have a duty. So no, it wouldn't be okay to neglect any duty, right?
Yeah,
I'm
so you don't
we're
think you'd have
arguing
you
whether
don't think
there
you'd
is a
have a
duty
duty to
here.
care for them, right?
Well, I don't think you would have a specific duty to care for this child. I think if you decide I don't want to take care of this child, someone else would come and take care of it, assumedly, if you're pressing this button and spawning children. Um, but like I said, I don't think this is really different enough from the pregnancy scenario we're debating already to change our, to test our intuitions, really.
Okay,
Um,
I think it is. I'm not sure how much more I can add on this. Is there anything that you want to ask me that you think sort of wrong with
yeah.
my position before I maybe move to another guest?
So you think there is at least some extent to which the government should force us to give our body to other people if they need it to live, correct?
If they need it to live. Um, when you say like give your body, when we're talking about cases other than pregnancy, it's sort of complicated about like the extent. So like for example, I think there was like a case that went to the Supreme Court within like the last 75 years or so, where someone was at another person's house for a dinner. They were closing like a sale on like a cow or some cattle or something, and he fell ill. And the people who were having the dinner said like, well, we consented to you having dinner with us, but not like staying the night. And so they like kicked the guy out, even though he was like clearly ill or something. And then he had like some harm, like frostbite or something like that. And he was able to actually sue them, and he was able to get some like recovery for damages or something. And in the case, I believe that one of the judges said something along the lines of, due to his condition and that you knew of his condition, like the basic human morality obligated you to actually like allow him to stay like on your property for a certain amount of time. So I think that there are some obligations that we have to each other, but it'll obviously depend on the situation, the severity, etc.
I'm not sure that do you know the court case?
I don't know. I'd have to look up the name.
I mean, I think one that's much more relevant is McFall v. Shimp. Are you familiar with that?
Somewhat. I've heard like sort of the comparisons, but if you know like the details, feel free to lay it out.
Yeah. Robert McFall, the guy suing his cousin Shimp, he had a rare disease, essentially, long story short, where he needed a bone marrow transplant to survive, and his cousin was essentially the only match, right? And so he sued his cousin for his bone marrow because the cousin wasn't initially consenting. And the Supreme Court ultimately decided that no, the cousin has no obligation to give his cousin the bone marrow, McFall. And yeah, McFall did end up dying. But yeah, I think I generally agree with the Supreme Court that the fact that someone needs your body to live doesn't entitle them to your body. I kind of just hold that as a general principle, and I think that is pretty fair. I think that's pretty intuitive. And I guess, is that our primary disagreement?
Well, so I would agree with like the ruling there. I don't think that someone should be forced to give their bone marrow when they were not the one who's responsible for placing the individual in a dependent condition. But that's completely different from pregnancy, which is basic care, it's proportionate care, and the individuals who are responsible for the existence of the child, the mother and the father, one of them, the mother, would be the one who would be, helping to use her body to provide care for the child, which she also does in the 18 years after birth through neglect laws. So I think the distinction there would be relationship is very important. The difference of someone's cousin versus someone's child who they were responsible for conceiving. And then also the type of care. In the case of pregnancy, that's basic care that all of us need to survive. It's something that's typical. It's something that's proportionate. So I don't think that it's as analogous as you maybe think it is.
Well, I'm trying to, when you say basic care, what are the conditions that establish something as basic care or not?
Yeah. So this might be an oversimplification, but I think one way to think
Mhm.
about it is just what is the care that every human being needs to survive. So those would be things like shelter, food, water. In the case of pregnancy, gestating in your mother's womb until birth.
Okay, so housing, so just like the general things that people need to survive.
So just
What
to
if what
clarify,
if someone needs
particularly that would be the responsibility parents have to children because
okay.
they're the ones who are responsible for the dependency condition of those children until they reach maturity, which would typically be around age 18. So once someone's 18, right, they can leave the house and parents no longer have those obligations because that child's now no longer going to be dependent on the parents for providing food, shelter, water, etc.
So would it, but it wouldn't be only children, right? You said in a scenario where you stumbled upon like a homeless person who needs care from you to survive, you would also be obligated to them, right?
To a certain extent, and probably like for, you could argue like probably for like a certain duration of time. Like there could be situations where the obligations that I might have to someone else in order to care for them would reach the level of being extraordinary and disproportionate, going far beyond something that's basic care that can be provided at, without an undue burden unto myself.
And what do you what's your stance on pregnant women who were pregnant as a result of grape? Forgot to ask earlier.
Yeah, in that case, I also don't think that they should be able to get abortions. I think it would still be murder.
Okay, well, how do you explain that then?
Yeah, because parents have obligations to their children, and it's not just on the basis of consent, but also just simply on the basis of the relationship between parents and children. So I think like the reason I
Well,
focus on
doesn't the
go ahead.
consent view just become completely redundant at that point? If that has nothing to do, if they were raped and become pregnant as a result of that, and they still have the obligation, why do you even argue for the other view then?
So the reason I was mentioning consent is because I know that that sounds like it's something that's quite important to your ethical framework, right? So when having like a conversation where, you might be trying to persuade someone or maybe nudge them a bit, it's not always the case that it's the most helpful to work within your own ethical framework. Because if I can show that 99% of abortions within your own ethical framework are wrong, then it would probably make sense to, make those appeals, even though in the case of rape, which is less than like 1% of abortions, the idea that there's a implicit consent from having consensual intercourse is obviously not applying there because the intercourse wasn't consensual.
Okay, well, I guess I'm confused. So simply having a biological child to you means you have an inherent obligation
I
to
believe so,
that
yes.
child. And why is that?
Because I mean, it's the same reason that fathers have to pay child support.
Well, I mean, without appealing to legality, how would you explain
Yeah,
that?
it's just parents have a moral obligation to care for their children. If you disagree with that, then you're essentially left with. I don't see how anyone could have an obligation to care for children, and children could just be neglected to death. Which I know you'll say like neglected implies that there is a requirement to provide care, but you could have children who aren't. Maybe to rephrase and not use the term neglect, you could then have children who aren't receiving care from anyone and die as a consequence.
I mean, I could just say like I'm a communist, and the reason I am is because if not, there'll be a bunch of people that will die as a result of them not getting the resources that other people are hoarding, right? Like there are obviously billionaires or wealthy people, just more generally, who could keep a lot of other people alive by us forcing them to give up their resources, right?
Yeah,
I'm
there's a
assuming
difference
you're
in
not
the
a communist,
relationship.
right? Okay, well, you just said, that they would die if they're not taken care of. That's true of other people too. I'm asking what specifically is creating the obligation in this relationship?
Okay, so for one, you could kind of just argue from the absurdity on like the contrary in this perspective, because if I assume that there is no obligation that parents have to their children as a result of the relationship that's there, then I'm kind of left with children can just be um, denied care by anyone and everyone and die as a consequence. I think that's really just so absurd that it can be kind of taken as not being the case, and we can assume rightfully and justfully so that parents have obligations to their children.
But again, by that logic, if it's an absurdity that people are dying as a result of them not getting the resources of others, by that logic, we should force everybody who's wealthy and has an abundance of resources to give their resources up to other people to prevent death, right? That's why I'm saying this is not explaining any specific obligation between a parent and a child biologically.
I think that it is though, because if parents don't have that obligation, then no one does. So like the
That's
difference,
not true.
like the reason why I
I
don't
could
think
say
that
I could say you have an obligation to your cousin. We can make up any random amounts of
except that I
obligation.
didn't place my cousin in a dependent condition, but a parent
Okay,
did.
that's irrelevant to you. You said even if someone was raped and impregnated as a result of a rapist, they are still obligated as well to the child.
Sure. Yeah.
They didn't.
That's
They
my
never
point.
consented, right? So I'm still just trying to understand why that relationship creates any special obligation.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would go to that parent. I mean, maybe this is just something that I hold like in principle, and maybe we just disagree
Okay.
in principle on this, but I think it's a good principle to have that parents, because of their biological relationship to their children, are obligated to provide basic care to their children.
Yeah, if you just hold that axiomatically, that's fine. I understand. But in that case, I don't think I have any other questions for you, Hayden. But I did enjoy the discussion.
Yeah, I did as well. Appreciate you hopping on to talk.
No problem, man. Have a good night.
You too. All right, so just a reminder before I accept another guest, looking for people who are going to be respectful, good faith conversation, not hyper tense or aggressive or anything like that. So if you're joining just to throw insults, then please, I guess, remove your guest invitation. I am going to quickly check to make sure that everything's going smoothly over on YouTube, which it appears that it is. Let me just make sure. All right. Yep. Looks like everything's working over there as well. All right. Next guest. Hi. How old are you?
Oh, what's up? I'm 18.
Okay. What do you think about abortion?
I'm pro-choice, but I'm really busy, so I could just like draw me and bring up like a different person.
Okay. I'll just bring up someone else.
Specifically Dubert, by the way, if you don't mind.
How old are you?
Hello, I'm 18.
Okay. I'm not sure that she's 18. Didn't really sound like that. Hi. How old are you?
Hello. Oh, wait. Hey, I'm 19. Do you mind if I need to connect my headphones? Could you give me like 5 seconds? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. What's up, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. What do you think about abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably morally permissible in most cases.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, I think when we look at how our actions affect other individuals, we often try to cash it out in terms of harm. And I suspect that the harm being done to the mother probably supersedes that's being done to the fetus in the earliest stages. And in virtue of that, I think that is going to be morally permissible.
Okay. Just to clarify, what are you using to measure harm here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pluralist, so I think there's different, tons of different, theories. But broadly speaking, it's going to be some sort of counterfactual account where we look at two different worlds. We could also look at things like the interests as well as sort of the total net amount of well-being that's being lost.
Okay. Interesting. Is the basis for the unborn child not necessarily having as much harm, possibly that they're not sentient or not conscious or something along those lines?
Yeah, roughly. It seems that obviously it seems that they can be harmed, but it seems like some of those harms might not be morally relevant. And even if some are. It seems that the greatest harms that we talk about when we talk about, people being harmed, people being put in these states, is generally going to be some sort of phenomenal harm, which it's not capable of having.
Okay, what do you mean by phenomenal harm?
Just having to do with mental states,
Okay,
like some
gotcha.
sort of psychological harm. Yeah.
Okay. And is there like a cutoff for your position on abortion, like past which you think it should be illegal or would be immoral?
I mean, I'd probably defer to some sort of scientific judgment, but if I had to go for some sort of legal principle, it would be roughly like 20 weeks,
Okay.
because that seems to be employing some sort of precautionary stance.
Am I correct in assuming that that's kind of where you think consciousness probably starts to form?
Yeah, yeah. Now, if we do have new evidence, obviously I'd update on that.
Okay, gotcha. Um, so it sounds like your position would essentially be on the personhood of the child. The reason I say that is because if it was based on bodily autonomy, then it would seem to justify abortion up to birth. But it doesn't sound like you're willing to go quite that far. So would it be fair to say that you think once consciousness comes into play, personhood begins, and therefore abortion beyond that point would result in more harm to the unborn child than it would to the mother, and therefore abortion past 20 weeks would be unjustified?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that personhood does start at roughly your first experience, but I don't think that that's a necessary commitment of my view. But yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, yeah, that's construed properly.
Okay, gotcha. Do you consider like it wrong to harm like non-human animals, for example, by like
Yeah,
okay, so just clarify, are you like vegan, vegetarian, or
yeah, yeah, vegetarian.
okay? And do you think that we should impose that view in law as well then?
Yeah, I do. I think that, if we look at the meat processing industry right now, it's really abhorrent. And I think, we should fight for animal rights as well. They have experiences just like us, and it seems kind of wrong to kill them. I don't really see a moral difference between them and humans, such that it would allow, torturing them for food.
Mhm. But we shouldn't kill them at all for food, though, right? It's not even just about like humane conditions. It's like, wouldn't it be beyond that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I will say I'm slightly more agnostic on that due to certain considerations regarding how connected they are with their future, but probably not. Like, I mean, pigs are pretty intelligent. They're pretty social creatures. I don't think that you should be unaliving them.
Okay. And do you think that we should be giving welfare to non-human animals who are also sentient, like we have, for example, WIC benefits, which are like the Women, Infants, and Children program, where we give transfer payments, and SNAP benefits are another example where we give transfer payments from government through taxation to children who are at roughly similar sentience levels as not some non-human animals.
Um, I mean, that seemed to turn on some questions about political philosophy that, I mean, we probably don't need to get into. But look, if the question is going to be, am I right in saying that this sort of line of questioning you're trying to go down is what would be the difference between some sort of pig and a roughly analogous, human entity with like the same mental life? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, it's essentially like if we're basing personhood off of consciousness and sentience, then that's going to apply to some non-human animals as well. And if we want to be a society that treats all humans equally, then it would seem to extend not only to making it illegal to murder non-human animals who are sentient, but also to putting them essentially on like a similar playing field in terms of entitlements and benefit spending to humans who might be injured or are young.
Yeah, so I don't think that's true, and I'll try to explicate why. It seems that, yeah, I mean, if we're going to be treating, animals like cows and pigs as persons, they're entitled to certain moral entitlements, but that isn't to say that they're on the same playing field as roughly, analogous humans with the same mental lives. And there's going to be a couple of reasons for that. The first is going to be the psychological connectedness to the future, right? When we see the ability of humans to differentiate their experiences from one another, they have stronger ties to their future, as well as a greater amount of future experiences and more robust consciousness happening in the future, plus other sort of prudential concerns like, social bonds and other things of that nature. It doesn't really seem that these two would be analogous. It kind of seems to just say, look, we should treat them both and have some sort of sufficient moral consideration for both. And then humans have, more than that.
Yeah. So just to clarify though, a lot of what you just laid out would only apply for it would apply for most human beings. I'd acknowledge that, but there's going to be some like injured born humans who might not ever develop in the normal course of human development, and so they might be forever, not forever, but for the duration of their life at sort of the rationality level and the consciousness level of some non-human animals. But presumably you think they should still be entitled to the same government benefits as those young human beings who are at sort of that same level of rationality and consciousness, right?
Um, I mean, this would turn on some other questions regarding, how they interact with society and the purpose of government. So the big point is it seems that, humans, just in virtue of the way that government is set up, have a more foundational role inside of the government, right? Like we play a larger role in society. So maybe there might be something going on there. But I would probably say that, like, if we're going to be focusing on the normative position, it seems that they're both equally harmed by death if you just normalize all the mental facts. It doesn't seem that, just because one has a different DNA set, that they're vastly, more harmed by death. That I don't really take that view.
Okay, I guess I'll try to take it back to abortion here. Do you think that someone could be harmed without ever being consciously aware of the harm?
Yeah.
Okay, could you give me an example?
Of just any entity or just, like a human specifically.
Yeah, I mean we'll do human specifically.
Well, I mean, it could be, let's say, for instance, you as a young child, or like, let's say while you were developing in the womb, your mother was drinking or something, gave you fetal alcohol syndrome, and you were cognitively impaired such that you could no longer, you couldn't reflect on that or something like that. I don't know. That seems to be a harm. Or, in the case of humans developing anencephaly, that seems to be harmful. Yeah.
Okay, quick question on that. That's an interesting point you made about how, like, if a woman takes a certain substance, it could cause damage to the child even before they're conscious, and you think that would be ethically wrong. So, like, if a woman gives birth and it's clear that she was taking some substance that caused significant harm to the child, and it's shown in a court with due process that she did that intentionally, do you think that she should face some sort of consequence for that legally?
Um, like she did so like intentionally and like knowingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. To me, one of the problems that I see with like the personhood at consciousness thing is if law enforcement and the state is given a choice between harm to no person and harm to a person in the future, it would seem like we would typically want them to opt for harming no person. So I kind of feel like your position would say that if law enforcement found out that a woman at 15 or 16 weeks pregnant had been taking substances known to cause serious harm to unborn human beings, that it could be justified for them to actually force her to get an abortion because they're choosing between either harm to no person or harm to a person in the future. Well, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
Are you asking me, let's say, we have knowledge that this woman has given, let's just say it's FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, just to keep it consistent, maybe. And you have knowledge about this, and prior to sentience, you're asking, do you think that you ought abort this?
Yeah, like should the state say that the woman has to abort the unborn child because it's not a person, and the state is faced with the choice of harm to no person or allowing the pregnancy to continue and there being harm to a person in the future?
Um, hmm, I'm not too sure, but I mean, probably intuitively, I would say that you probably should get the abortion. Like, I mean, I think that's probably what you should do. I don't know. Like the one part that's kind of weird is like the forcing a woman to get an abortion. That might turn on some like autonomy considerations that I have, but yeah, I don't know. I'd say I'm probably like my intuitions probably lead me to say like, yeah, I should probably get the abortion there and probably force them, though I'm a little bit more iffy on that part.
Okay, just to clarify, because I kind of thought about this in a debate I had a while ago, where I think it's fair for like someone with your position or personhood at consciousness position to say, if a child is known at like 15 weeks to have a birth defect or some ailment that occurred naturally, the state shouldn't force her to get the abortion because in that case she didn't do anything wrong, and so that it'd be wrong to violate sort of her preferences there. But I think that doesn't apply in the case of where she ingested a substance intentionally that caused the child in the womb to have some sort of harm in the future, after 20 weeks, according to your position. The reason I don't think that you can say that the state can step away there is because in that case, she actually had a role in causing the harm to a person in the future. And so I think it would be fair for the state, under your position, I think it would entail that the state steps in and actually has to force her to get the abortion.
I mean, this also maybe kind of gets into like the eugenicsy area of like, should we be doing this? But I don't really see that great of a wrong maker here. And as far as the person and stuff goes, any any other views regarding personhood that, don't stem from sort of mental states, I think those views just kind of collapse. So it seems that, maybe it has some sort of weird normative implications, but I'm pretty skeptical of using these normative implications that don't seem completely ridiculously absurd on face value to start, making metaphysical claims about the nature of persons, if that makes sense.
Okay. I'm just curious, what do you think is sort of like absurd about my position where it's persons are human beings, which would be from conception?
Well, are you meaning to say that a person is identical to a human organism, like an animalism view?
I'm not sure like what animalism is, but my position would be
Yeah,
a person is a human organism.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so broadly speaking, animalism is just the view that, we are human organisms. Like as long as the human organism survives, we survive. Those are sort of the conditions. Now, the most famous defeater, or at least what I think, and I wonder if you've heard this before, is some sort of transplant intuition. So imagine that, I take your cerebrum out of your brain, and your cerebrum is what contains your conscious experience, your mental states, your psychological profile, and I leave behind the lower brain, which is what kind of maintains organism structure and keeps your organs like operating, all that stuff, right? So I remove your cerebrum. The organism is still alive. It's being kept alive due to the lower brain. And I transplant your cerebrum into another organism which was lacking a cerebrum, so kind of just an empty husk. Now the question is, that organism wakes up, has all your memories, walks around, goes home and it's like, talks to your family, whatever. The question is just where do you think you went? Do you think that you're in the one that lost the cerebrum, or do you think you're in the one that is currently walking around?
So you're not like this. I'm happy to maybe come back to answering that, and maybe you can re-ask it again. But here's why I don't really feel like that's that good of a question. I think that humans are pretty much mind-body unions. Now, obviously, like there's a certain point in the beginning of development where we lack a mind and we are just a body. But when we think of what makes us a person, if we are to say that that's just our mind, then it doesn't really make sense out of how we treat harm to our bodies, right? If someone comes up to me and they saw off my arm, we would typically treat that as a crime against me as a person, not just like a property that I inhabit, or like if someone was to damage my house. Instead, we would actually view that as what makes me me is not just my mind, but rather a combination of mind and body. And then prior to consciousness, it would just be body there, obviously, until a mind is developed. But what would actually make me me is organic unity, the fact that there are parts working for the good of a whole. But under your view, if it's just a mind, I don't understand how anyone can make sense out of crimes against someone as a person through harm to the body.
Yeah, I mean, I did if you could just answer the
Okay.
transplant intuition, and then I'll answer both of them
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. So to clarify, it sounds like it's if sort of like upper level brain activities, such as like consciousness, memories, all that was transplanted from my body into another body, which one would be me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would honestly think that it's essentially like they're both me because for one, you can't really do that in reality at this point, and I kind of doubt that you ever would be able to. But even if you could, it would essentially be my body would still be left in person A, and the mind would be in person B, assuming that there's organic unity in both. There would essentially have been there'd be two persons there, one with what was my body, one with what was my mind. But I don't think this is particularly helpful because it's not even possible as far as I'm aware.
Okay. So I'll answer the first critique of my position, and then I'll
Okay.
talk about why I think the transplant intuition does pose a problem to your view.
Okay.
Okay. So for the first part, it seems that my view can fully commit to this due to kind of taking what's known as a reductionist picture, where all reductionism is saying is when we talk about terms, whenever we talk about some term, we're just saying that it could be reduced to that non-term. So okay, when we talk about persons and persons like continuing and personal identity, these sorts of concepts can be broken down into non-personal terms. So if you want a similar analogy, we can think about how we talk about nations. Let's say, for instance, you say something like, France has just invaded Germany. Well, what you're talking about there is, the political structure of France, and the nation state of France has declared war on Germany. Now, you can also say something like, France is roughly hexagonal. And when you say that sentence, what you're saying is the landmass is, in a shape that roughly resembles a hexagon. Now, that doesn't mean that France is either a nation state or a hexagon, right? That's not what that means. It just means that there's, sort of different ways that we refer to them. Now, to bring that back into my theory of personal identity, all we're saying is that, let's say we have some sort of organism with a mind. The entire thing in totality, the mind and body, are the person, right? I'm not committed to the view that, it's just certain regions of the brain. It's an embodied mind or an embodied person. And, we see this in how we talk about, personal terms like I or me, right? Oftentimes, let's say you bumped into me and you spilled some sauce on my jacket. I'd say, hey man, you spilled something on me, right? So I think we can see that. And I'm happy to hear what you think about that. Now, for the second point about animalism, yeah. So the first issue is you can't be in both. And the reason why you can't be in both is, it violates this law. It violates this law of diachronic identity of you can't just start branching off because you'd be committed to things like I'm in two places at once, which I don't think is possible. You'd be committed to saying things like, let's say someone puts a robot brain in the other body and it goes and unalives someone, then, you should be and that's just going about your life. You should be penalized, right? So that's completely like that doesn't seem to be a good view. And the second point about it not being possible right now, yeah, that's completely fine. It could be not possible right now. It's just meant to sort of tease out your intuitions regarding these cases on what we really matter. So sorry I talked for a while, but I'm happy to.
Yeah. So just one question kind of on what you mentioned there. Do you think it would be fair for someone to say, my body is in that body and my mind is then in a different body?
Okay, what is my doing here, right? Because when you say my body, that you have to you're presupposing that there's some person which has some ownership over the body, right? So you have to be in one location, right? When I'm asking where are you, and you say my mind is somewhere, that just pushes the bump around the rug. You have to be somewhere in order to make that claim.
Yeah. The way that I kind of would think about it is if take me right now, right? I have my mind, my body. The reason when I use my there, I think it's fair for me to use it because I possess them both as a result of me viewing the person as through the lens of organic unity, right? Where parts are working for the good of the whole. And then if someone was to transplant my brain to a different body, it would seem like something would have been lost there, right? That what I had right now, right? My body would be lost then, but it would seem wrong for someone to then say that, that's no longer, I don't know. I just don't feel like this is particularly helpful because it's not like how humans develop or how humans operate as organisms. So I guess it just doesn't seem particularly helpful to me. Feel free to respond to that. And then I do have one more question on what you mentioned.
Okay. So the one point there is, yeah, I agree. That's a completely, valid thing to say, where you say like, yeah, let's say, this organism wakes up, you'd say, hey, I'm in a new body now. Oh, my old body is over there. That's completely fine. But that is under the assumption that you at the original time are now in a new body, right? If it was the case that animalism was true, you wouldn't be in a new body. You would have just lost part of your brain. That's the whole critique that's being made. The whole critique is we intuitively want to say that, it seems that you get a new body. It's almost like, you change out your mech suit or something like that in a video game. We think that that's what happens, or at least that's what our intuitions are saying. But under animalism, you'd be committed to saying, yeah, all that happened is I lost part of my brain. And then this new organism gained part of its brain. That seems a bit implausible to me. So that was the only critique that was being made there.
Okay. One thing that's worth adding. I mean, like in these conversations, I don't always appeal to Christianity, but I'm assuming you don't necessarily want to go there because it can sometimes get sidetracked. But from the Christian worldview, it would be argued that there's something immaterial about human beings as persons as well. But I don't necessarily want to go too far down that line. I'll let you respond to that, and then I will ask the question I was going to ask earlier.
Okay. I mean, as far as like dualism goes, or like theories about the soul, I think those are probably false, just due to some sort of like interaction issues between immaterial and material things, as well as it seems like most things can kind of just be explained away with it seems like most things can just be explained away with physical terms. But if it's a commitment of, your theology, yeah, that then it seems fine. It seems like you have good reason for believing that. So yeah.
Okay. So the question I was going to ask is one thing that is a bit confusing to me am I okay in assuming that you're like an atheist materialist?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Physicalist, like
Yeah. So
broadly
I mean,
speaking, yeah.
one thing that's a bit confusing to me is when like materialists argue that consciousness is meaningful or matters or is what makes someone a person. Because if all that there is matter, then consciousness is really just like a chemical and physical reaction. Just like if I took like a soda bottle and I shook it up and then I popped the lid and it fizzed. In both cases, it's just chemical and physical reactions. There's really nothing meaningful there.
Are you asking me why it has meaning under a physicalist view, or are you asking me like how physical, like if this is an issue for physicalism, trying to account for why consciousness has meaning?
I'm just wondering, like, why should the conscious experience of a human being be protected any more than other physical and chemical reactions, like pop bottles that fizz?
Oh, well, I mean, that's just going to be because of the nature of the action, right? It's just inherently, action guiding, right? The same way that, look, if you're asking me why does like let's say you feel pain, right? Whenever you have the phenomenal experience of pain, you sort of withdraw from that, right? If you put your hand on a hot stove, you go, I don't like that, you kind of withdraw it. If you're asking me why does that happen under physicalism, well, the answer is yeah, it's a chemical reaction. And if you're asking why should we not, you know, pursue pain, like then it would just be because pain is a thing that isn't to be pursued, right? It doesn't have a to be pursuedness property, right? Whereas, things like pleasurable experiences, like, being the warmth or something like that, those are things that we pursue just inherently due to the way they are. Um, and I don't think just saying like, oh, it's chemical reactions, that doesn't really do much because under the physicalist view, everything is chemical reactions, right? Like you saying, oh, it's just chemical reactions, that doesn't really do much.
Yeah, but like if everything is just chemical reactions, why should we pursue some chemical reactions, such as those that people feel as pleasurable sensations, over other chemical reactions where people feel pain? Why is one chemical reaction more valuable than the other, or one ought to be pursued over the other?
Oh, well, it seems like the issue here might just be, putting one thing in front of the other in kind of the wrong way. It seems that first, before we start talking about the normative assessments, we talk about the metaphysical nature. And if we're just going off the hypothesis that, physicalism is true, and then we ask these questions, well, then the questions seem to just be like, well, physical reaction X seems to like guide my actions in this way, and then physical reaction Y seems to guide my actions in another way. Now, if you're saying it poses a problem for physicalism in the sense that it can't account for the fact that, you know, certain chemical reactions are worth other more than other chemical reactions, that might be the case. But I mean, I don't know which sort of angle you're coming at.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, why ought human beings or persons, which I think would probably, under your view, maybe include more than human beings, why should persons pursue maximizing the number of pleasurable chemical reactions as opposed to the number of painful chemical reactions?
Yeah, simply because, that's what we should. You're okay. Maybe it sounds like I'm being like very vague or obtuse on purpose, but your question to me kind of just sounds like, why should you do something you should do? Right? It seems okay. Take this sentence. It seems that you should not cause unnecessary suffering to people. Where unnecessary suffering, let's just say, or it seems that you should not kick a dog because it causes them to be in pain. Right? Just take that sentence. That seems to be pretty intuitive under every single view. Now, if you're asking me why should you not cause pain to people, well, that's just some sort of fundamental intuition that we all have. We have this very fundamental intuition that pain is bad. When we feel pain, we flinch away from it. Pleasurable states are good. Being in pain sucks, like stuff like that, right? Um, it happens to guide our actions. Like I don't think I can reduce it further than that.
But aren't there some people who enjoy inflicting pain?
Um, there might be people that enjoy inflicting pain, and the reason why that's wrong to do on top, like non-consenting people, is because it harms them, right? It's bad for them. These people don't enjoy that. But if you're talking about cases of masochists or sadists or something, yeah, because what the things that cause them to act in certain ways are going to be different than you or I. Similar to how, let's say, I inverted your sort of like phenomenal experience such that now, let's say you really like, right now, let's say you really like, tomato soup, but you really hate chicken noodle soup, and I switch that. Well, now it seems that you'd be eating a lot of, chicken noodle soup and not tomato soup just due to the mental states, right? It seems that the mental states are what are guiding our actions here.
To clarify though, when we have like some rare individuals who prioritize inflicting pain, it sounded like your response to that was, well, most of us don't share that view. But why are we assuming that the people who intentionally inflict pain are the ones that are wrong, and that we, those who don't want to inflict pain, are the ones who are right? Like, why are we making that assumption that the majority must be correct?
Well, I don't think that the majority must be correct. I'm a moral realist, so I just think that there's objective moral facts out there, and then, we sort of intuit them. Uh, like, it's like objectively wrong to cause people pain, under my view.
Just
I don't
curious,
know
is there
if,
is there anything beyond like pain that would inform your ethical system?
yeah, it seems to be like primarily mental states, right? Like, just imagine a world where there's just a bunch of rocks. Like, good luck making some moral claims in this world, right? Like,
Just curious, what if there was a world where there was a bunch of like physical, chemical, and electrical reactions? Do those things have value? Should they be protected?
well, it depends on how these physical, chemical, and electrical reactions, like what they cause, right? If they cause some sort of mental states or phenomenal states, yeah, it seems that they should be protected. But if all that's going on in this world is there's just a wave crashing into a beach over and over and over again, there's nothing like action guiding there, right? There's nothing wrong you can do to that.
Okay, I'm curious, what are you meaning by mental states here? Because if I'm assuming that all our brains are doing are electrical, physical, and chemical reactions, then it would seem like it's a tremendous leap to say that there's anything meaningful there, or to refer to a mental state there, but not in the case of like a shaken up soda bottle that I run some electricity through with some coins in it.
Well, okay, let me think on how to sort of convey this. The Okay, well, first, I don't think that consciousness or mental states are directly reducible to some sort of like physical fact, right? I think maybe they, have some supervenience relation with the physical fact or something. It's like property dualism, right? Or like type B physicalism. That's You're effectively saying they're not the exact same thing, but they're fundamentally like related. There's some sort of supervenience there or something like that. That seems to be getting into like Philip mind discussions. Now, if you're asking how can we make some sort of normative claims from that, well, I don't see how it's any different than the substance dualist who just says, oh yeah, there are two different things going on here. There's the mental and the physical. It's just that the mental is caused by this immaterial substance. That just seems to push the bump down the rug a little bit more to beg the question of, or sorry, to ask the question of, well, why do we care about this mysterious immaterial soul thingy, right? Like, if all immaterial souls are is just these things that kind of float around. Now, I will say under some sort of theistic worldview, that probably answers a lot of these questions. But if we're just comparing these two, theories about the mind, I don't see why either one of them leads you to a different answer. So what I'm trying to say is, it seems that both of them either lead you to the conclusion that mental states are action guiding, they should be protected, all of that, or both of them lead you to the conclusion that none of these things are true. And I think that is absurd, right? That's crazy. So we should just accept, the former hypothesis.
Just to clarify, what was the term you used? It was like decision action guiding, right?
Yeah.
Okay, why do you think that a mind I don't understand how you reason from what's going on in our minds, our chemical, physical, electrical reactions, to there's some actions that people have control over. Because if I'm taking the materialist view, I have no free will.
Well, okay, now we seem to be getting into free will, and maybe I can commit to saying, I mean, one, I'm really dubious about this just because of, maybe there's some sort of, like backwards causation or something like that. But it seems that I could just like accept some sort of compatibilist hypothesis, and maybe I'm pretty happy with that. Though to be fair, I haven't read too much into free will. I don't know. That seems to be the prominent answer in the literature, some sort of compatibilist theory.
Yeah, but it would seem to me like that's not even plausible. It would seem that if we're saying that all that there is in the world is matter and what's going on in our brains are chemical, physical, electrical reactions, then compatibilism is out. There's no possibility that that's the case.
Well, wait, I don't think that's true, right? Compatibilism essentially is trying to just, I mean, the whole point of compatibilism is to branch, determinism. It's trying to say determinism isn't a problem for free will. Now, the compatibilist defines free will a little bit differently than, the libertarian free will, the person who believes in libertarian free will. But I will say this just seems to be a different issue. And if we're going to be talking about this, I'd bring up stuff like, divine foreknowledge and those sorts of things. But yeah, I'll just admit that I'm not too well read on this.
Yeah, so just to clarify, like the reason that I brought it up in the context of like, what do you think about abortion is just like if someone's going to base personhood on consciousness, but then argue from like the materialist position that consciousness is just chemical, physical reactions, then I don't see why we would want to protect consciousness or call some chemical, physical reactions good and others bad when we have other chemical, physical reactions like a shaken up soda bottle where we run some electricity through it and we just treat that as something that's completely neutral, something that's meaningless. If that shaken up soda bottle is neutral, meaningless, not something that ought to be considered, then neither is what we're calling consciousness.
I mean, yeah, the question just comes down to be like, we don't care about shaking up soda bottles and, we care about consciousness. But do you really think that if I just adopt substance dualism and then just say, yeah, like ensoulment occurs roughly at, when your first memory occurs or like roughly around that point, do you really think that that's solving all of these issues that you're posing?
But where are you
Because,
getting like the idea of ensoulment is what I don't understand. Like if you're not,
oh yeah,
adhering to some
that's just
religion,
explained by,
go
oh wait,
ahead.
that's not true, right? It seems that, Michael Huemer, the goat, he's a substance dualist. He doesn't hold to, any god. I mean, I don't see why a soul couldn't exist absent religion, right? It would just be guided by some sort of, psychophysical laws, and that seems to be fine. It seems we've strayed quite a bit away from abortion, which is fine. I'm happy to talk about this, but maybe you want to get to another guest. This Artorias guy I've heard is pretty good. You should maybe talk to him.
Okay. I guess we can move on to the next guest. I appreciate you stopping in for a respectful conversation.
Yeah, of course, man. I'm happy to talk some other time. Maybe I'll DM you with some papers or something. But yeah,
Okay. Have a good
thank
one.
you. You too.
So that's the type of respectful conversations that I'm looking for those who are wondering. So far, we've had respectful guests. This has been working pretty good so far. I'm going to quickly check on YouTube and make sure that everything's still running well there. And it looks like it is. So I'll move on to the next guest.
Yo,
How
what's
old are
up?
you?
21, 2004.
Okay, sounds good. What do you think about abortion?
Yeah, I think most abortions are morally impermissible, but I disagree with you on not giving the grape exception, so we can discuss that.
Okay, so just to clarify, it sounds like in the case of consensual intercourse, you think that abortion should be illegal then?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's through all 9 months?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, why don't you think that, or why do you think there should be a grape exception?
Yeah, well, firstly, we have to discuss why I think in the case of consensual smacks, there's an obligation present. So I don't think that just being a human organism or just being a person or just having like future viable experiences on its own is sufficient to make you obligated to something or someone. Hey, thank you for the gifts. Um, And like a good analogy here is like, okay, you're not obligated to the violinist or your neighbor or like some random person who needs your help or your resources for 9 months. And then, but then when you look at consensual sex in elective cases of abortion, that's not true. The mother is actively partaking in an action, unknowingly, willingly, and foreseeably, that puts the baby in a state of dependency. So that generates an obligation. And then a good parity argument is, imagine I take Hayden and I push him in a pool and I know he can't swim. And then I'm like, yeah, you know, even though I pushed you in the pool, knowing you can't swim, I'm just not going to save you because I'm a scumbag. So that's why I think causal obligation is successful. And then that's just not present in grape cases. And then the attempts people make at establishing obligations, like for example, you did, like just being the biological parent, are not successful in my eyes.
Okay. Why don't you think that the relationship argument is successful?
But the view that just being like the biologically connected to the offspring.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine there's a woman and I snap my fingers and I make her pregnant, and then she has to go through 9 months of gestation. I think most people would converge on the fact that you're not obligated there. So that would falsify that view, even though she is the mother. Or imagine like a woman falls asleep and somebody inseminates her with a random IVF embryo or something, and then now she's the biological offspring. I don't think most people think that she should endure 9 months of gestation and like pushing a watermelon out because somebody did this to her. And then also, if you do take this view, like ad infinitum, meaning infinitely, it would seem to be the case that you could do this to a random woman, which is false. So yeah,
Okay.
that was a little long-winded.
Just curious if a woman was unconscious for a surgery and a doctor was to grape her, she's unknowingly pregnant, so she never has the opportunity to get an abortion.
Mhm.
She's stuck in a snow cabin for 1 to 2 weeks or however long because she's just trapped in there from the snow. She gives birth. Do you think she should be legally obligated to provide basic care to the child, like breastfeeding, for the 2 weeks?
Legal obligation. Okay, typically I'm silent on legality because it gets into more like there's more moving variables there, but morally I think yes, and also legally probably yes. And the reason you are is because firstly, the obligation there is much more reasonable. Like breastfeeding a child is not going to be accruing the same amount of harm to the mother as 9 months of gestation, like the psychological and physical harm, like your organs shifting, whatever. She already has the breast milk, it's already present in her. All the baby has to do is like suckle on the breast for like a minute and then it's over with. So I do think that she's obligated there. You have a reasonable obligation to a person. So that's why I think she's obligated there.
Okay, and if the duration was extended, like suppose, I know that these hypotheticals are kind of crazy, but it is.
That's
what it
fine.
is.
It's fine. I'm used to it.
Suppose that like instead of a snow cabin in the United States, she is on a snow cabin in like Antarctica, and they can't get to her for like a year or 2 years. Would you kind of maintain the same thing there, that she'd be obligated to care for that child for that period of time?
1 to 2 years. I mean, so she has to breastfeed it, and then once the baby grows up, she just has to provide it with like food and water.
Yeah, and shelter.
Yeah, I still think that's pretty reasonable of her to do. Like she's not going through extreme cases of pregnancy, or sorry, suffering that's true of pregnancy. So I still think there's like a reasonable proximal obligation to another person. Like your view and other views would converge on the fact that at that point the fetus is a person, or the baby has become a person, and then the obligation there is much more reasonable. Like we already mentioned, like okay, you breastfeed it for like a year, which takes a minute each time, and then okay, food and water, which I'm assuming you're stipulating she has access to. That's for a year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we could even, I'm just curious, if the duration, let's just suppose, was extended to 18 years, which obviously would be an extreme hypothetical, but let's just do it. Would your answer kind of remain the same, that she's got to care for the child till it reaches maturity?
Yeah, I don't think 18 years of providing like food and water is going to be analogous harm to the average case of pregnancy, because from my understanding, like the average case of pregnancy is one of the most painful things you can go through. You can get gestational diabetes, your organs shift around, you get very bloated, you have to like push out a watermelon, your vagina can like rip open. Like my mother had to get a C-section. And then I'm assuming that harm is not being like that type of harm is not accrued over 18 years. But if you keep if you bake in that it is, then I would say you're like she's not obligated if that sort of harm is being accrued onto the woman.
Okay. Just curious, do you think that like the totality of infringement on bodily autonomy and what is being required of the woman, the totality of what's required over those 18 years, do you think that that would exceed what would be required during 9 months of pregnancy in totality?
Yeah, I think the pregnancy is worse in totality.
Really? That's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
I think the
yeah.
opposite, actually. I think that caring for a child over the course of 18 years would, in totality, be a greater burden than carrying the child for 9 months and giving birth. But it sounds like you would disagree with me on that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that that's interesting? Because usually someone who would disagree with me on that would not, well, usually people wouldn't disagree with me on that. They would argue instead that the intensity of like childbirth and sort of like that last month or two of pregnancy is so high that it would therefore justify it. But I'm probably going to I'm going to push you a little bit on like the totality thing. I don't see how you can reason that 9 months of pregnancy and childbirth would be a greater
Well,
burden than 18 years of raising a child.
well, one of them is because of the intensity that you said at the last 1 to 2 months. So it's like exacerbated towards the end. No, I haven't been pregnant before, obviously,
Yeah,
but
me
like
neither.
I'm just suspecting, like based off of what you hear, like talks you have with women, like empirical analyses on painful things human beings can go through, like stuff like that. Um, so I mean, even if it came out that the harm is more on the 18 years, then I'd just change my answer to the hypothetical you gave me,
About
and
the
I'd say
intensity.
it'd be fine. Yeah, yeah, like if it were true, if it were true, then she would not be obligated to feed the child that was conceived via grape.
Interesting. But you do think
Yeah,
that like you do think that women who have consensual sex are required to go through like the 9 months in childbirth. So you don't think that you don't
absolutely.
think the
Yeah.
intensity is so high as to justify taking the life of the child if
Mm.
the woman opted in through consensual sex.
Yeah, well, but because remember, like in cases of consensual pregnancy, the woman knows
Yeah.
the consequences of having consensual sex, even if there's like a 1% chance. And then like the parody argument I like to make is, okay, imagine I have the touch of unaliving. I keep going around touching people, and then I end up like Thanos snapping somebody out of existence. I'm like, oh, well, why did this happen? Well, it's because I had access to the fact that there's a 1% chance that I have the touch of unaliving and somebody's gonna pass away. So that's like the same with the pregnancies that happen during consensual sex. Like the woman knew that there's like a 1%, 0.5%, 0.1% chance she's gonna get pregnant, that the fetus needs her body for 9 months, and then she's just being negligent, and then she's depriving her child that she conceived consensually of very robust, future valuable experiences. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I'm going to be able to convince you because it sounds like where our difference lies is you think that the care that is provided during the 9 months of pregnancy is so intense as to override sort of any rights that the child might have. But it sounds like you do think that, well, actually, okay, this would be a way to clarify our difference here. Do you think that someone who is a stranger to a child, a newborn infant that they find in the Antarctic has a moral obligation to raise them for 18 years?
So let me just get this straight. So there's a random child I found in the Antarctic, and then it's like, okay, I have to take care of them for 18 years. I would ask you, like, how much of my life would I miss out on? Like, am I gonna lose a bunch of money? Is my family gonna like suffer because of this?
The
Like,
same,
are my
the same as the woman who was unknowingly pregnant from grape.
oh, the same amount of harm is gonna be accrued? Like, if I take care of this? Oh yeah, then I'm not obligated. Definitely not.
No, I'm talking like for the 18 years.
Oh, the same amount of harm. 18 years of like providing shelter, food, water to like this random baby. Would I be
Yeah, like
obligated to them?
basically the question is, does the woman who got pregnant from Grape
Mhm.
have the same obligation to the child as a total stranger, or does she have more obligation towards the child by virtue of the relationship?
No, it'd be equivalent. Like, because remember, I don't accept the principle that if you're biologically related to something, then you're obligated to it.
So you would say that
Yeah.
like a stranger who came across a newborn in the Antarctic also has to raise that child for 18 years.
Um. Well, I don't remember. Did I say that the woman is obligated in the case you gave with the 18? I think I.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, if it's just like providing water and food, and then like you have like reasonable access to those sort of things, yeah. But if I'm taking like if I'm the person in Antarctica, okay, like I'm a college student, I don't have like a whole lot of money. It would like make me suffer immensely to take care of this child for 18 years. Like I wouldn't do it if I'm answering in good faith.
Okay. But what if like it was your child by Grape? Like you were a woman, you got pregnant by that. Then would you? Would you think you would have a greater responsibility to the child by virtue of your relationship?
So okay, I'm the woman who got raped, and then I have to take care of I'm snowed in. I have to take care of. Okay, so I mean, dude, the questions are gonna come up to okay. Do I have like how reasonable is it for me to provide it with food, water? Like how much am I gonna suffer as a result of taking care of this baby? If I
What
suffer
I'm trying to get
immensely,
at is-
no.
I'm just trying to see if you think that someone who is the biological mother of a child but who didn't conceive the child in consensual sex, if you think she has a greater obligation to the child than a total stranger. I'm trying to see like if you're
No,
really
no,
doing
no.
that.
Like just the fact that something is your offspring, I don't think generates those sort of obligations though. But I mean, I do have some questions for you. Like, if
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
okay, so here's one of the reasons I give the grape exception. This is like a thought experiment that was used to debunk pro-life arguments. It's called The Violinist by Judith
Yeah, I'm
Jarvis
aware of it,
Thompson.
yep.
Yeah, like okay, imagine you wake up and you're hooked up to me, Artorias, and then you have to stay hooked up to me for 9 months, and then you are going to suffer immensely. Hayden's going to lose his job. As a byproduct of that, your family's going to have less money. Your wife and kids are going to suffer. But if you end up disconnecting me from you, I'm going to die, and you know that. Would you stay connected to me for 9 months, or would you?
I don't think that I should be legally obligated to stay connected, which is really
But
like
morally speaking,
morally
I care about the
speaking?
moral. Yeah, I care about the moral part, not the legal one. Yeah.
Interesting. Most people care about the legal one, but morally speaking, if the question is like, what is the right thing to do?
Yeah.
If it's however long, like the violinist thing, which usually is like 9 months, I would say like, yeah, like the moral thing to do would be to love your neighbor as yourself. So I would say like the moral thing that I would want to do would be to care for the violinist. But actually, let me
Okay,
clarify.
cool.
In the situation you mentioned, did you say that like there was going to be great harm to family or?
Yeah, because like remember, like most women when they're pregnant, they can't work and stuff, so they're not generating money. So that we're just baking that into the hypothetical. So okay, like yeah, like you're gonna sit there hooked up to me. You're not gonna be able to generate money for your family. You can't like drive your kids to soccer practice. They're gonna miss their dad. Like, I think they can still come see you, but you're like immobile because you're hooked up to me.
Yeah, I mean, you can. It'd be reasonable to weigh like what the cost would be, the opportunity cost of staying hooked up. So like if the opportunity cost of staying hooked up was that I couldn't go get food for my kids and my 4 kids die, then like no, I'm not going to.
No, it's not that. It's not
But
that.
if
It's just
not,
that they.
if it's not an unreasonable
Yeah.
burden in the sense that I just miss out on like being able to get like a boat or a truck or go camping for 4 weeks or whatever because I'm stuck in the hospital for 6 months, then the course of action I would want to take would be to remain hooked up. But I don't think I should be legally required. But I will point out this obviously only applies in the case of grape, because in all the other cases
Yeah.
into the sex. One
Yeah, I
thing
mean,
though-
I think we just
Go ahead, go
fundamentally
ahead.
disagree with that, but like we both end up being pro-life. But then the other question I have for you is, you think that like just being a human organism, like just the fact that the mother has a child and the resulting offspring is like a human organism is sufficient to make her obligated to the pregnancy. So this is the last question I have for you. So it's, if a woman was pregnant with a partial molar pregnancy, do you think she'd be obligated to it? And if you don't know what that is, I can kind of explain.
You can explain it. My understanding with partial molar pregnancies is that there's no longer an organism there because something failed so catastrophically during the course of development that there's not integrated functioning anymore.
Well, my understanding is that the resulting offspring is Homo sapiens. So it's when two sperm cells inseminate one egg, and then there's a triploid set of chromosomes, and then there's just like placental overgrowth. And actually, this is interesting. In less than 1% of cases, there is a viable fetus that's present, and sometimes the doctors are able to save it. But like most, like 99% of the times, that's not true. You can Google what it looks like really quickly. It's like essentially a sack of meat, and like this is an argument I typically use against like people that take your view like animalism or whatever. Like okay, let's assume that it is a human animal, right? Like, do you think that'd be sufficient to make like a grape victim or something obligated to it?
Well, just to clarify, I don't think that we disagree on what a human organism is because you're pro-life from conception as well. I did just look up in perplexity if a partial molar pregnancy is an organism, and it said a partial molar pregnancy is not considered an independent organism in the biological sense, even though it arises from fertilization and may include some embryonic or fetal tissue. So like one thing that's important to keep in mind is just because something has human DNA doesn't make it an organism. So like a good example is if I cut off like some cells on my finger, those cells aren't an organism even though they have human DNA. So like what would make an organism would be parts working for the good of the whole, organic unity that can be lost in the course of development. So I sounds to me like that would be what would happen in the case of a partial molar pregnancy, is that organic unity is lost at some point and it's no longer an organism at a certain point.
Okay, organic unit. Okay, so for me, it's like I think I don't know much about the sciences. I can't tell you whether or not it's for sure offspring or not. But how I rationalize it is okay. Like how it's like the pro-choicers want to say, oh, it's a fetus. Fetus is not a human baby. It's like, okay, like you take them down the line of reasoning. Two human beings procreate, and then okay, what's the resulting offspring gonna be? It's not a donkey. It's not a banana. It's a human being. So that's how I'm thinking about it. But okay, like let's presume that it is a human being. Would you think that the mother would be obligated to it then?
It's not. That's like, I don't think that's a very useful hypothetical because my understanding based on, I haven't looked into this too deeply, but my understanding is a partial molar pregnancy isn't an organism. So like it's at the beginning, when it's a zygote, it is an organism. Throughout the course of development, something goes catastrophically wrong, and then it ceases being an organism because it loses organic unity.
Well, like I'm asking you in like a logically possible world or like a metaphysically possible world or whatever.
I don't think.
Well, let's say I can agree with you that it's like nomologically impossible or whatever.
It doesn't sound like it would be logically possible though, because it's like asking like if a circle can be a square, like if something that's not an organism was an organism. It seems like is the question.
No. So like there wouldn't be any logical contradiction entailed with the hypothetical because it'd have to violate one of the three laws of logic, which it doesn't. You can say it's a nomological possibility. Given what we know about biology, it's impossible, but like you can still derive evidence from logically possible worlds. Like that's why I'm asking you that question.
Well, I'm just curious. Tell me where I'm reasoning wrong here. But how is it not a logical contradiction to say if this thing that is not an organism was an organism, it by definition can't be an organism?
Well, it's not an organism in this world, but in a logically possible world, it is an organism. So there's no contradiction entailed in that world. You see what I'm saying?
Not really. I did have a question for you though, if it
yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, so if you're saying in the case of like a woman who's pregnant from grape that she has no obligation by virtue of her relationship to the child, then wouldn't you have to say that no one has an obligation to care for that child?
No, that doesn't follow because remember, like the reason I think she's not obligated is because like the harm that's accrued over the duration of the average pregnancy, that's not reasonable harm to hold somebody accountable for when causal obligation is not met. But
Okay,
if the baby is born and all you have to do is like, okay, feed it, give it water, give it food, take care of it, that does not harm me in any sense. Like, okay, maybe I'll lose out on an article of clothing or some water or food. I can easily replace that. But the sort of harm that's accrued over the course of 9 months of pregnancy, that can give you like gestational diabetes, depression, your vagina rips open, you get a C-section, you have to push out a watermelon. Like there's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think like the core disagreement is I just think that if I think that in totality, the 18 years is far more of a burden than the 9 months of pregnancy. So I think that's just where like we're fundamentally disagreeing here. But is there anything you want to ask me before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I would like an answer to the partial molar pregnancy question I asked you. Like, okay, like let's assume in this world it's not an organism, and in a possible world it is an organism. Do you think in that possible world, the mother would be obligated to it? Like, and let's say she's a rape victim.
I guess honestly, like my honest answer is like I don't know. It's hard, like I can't really wrap my brain around that. Like if
Okay, fair enough. Fair
yeah,
enough.
to me, you might disagree with this phrasing, but it really sounds like a question about square circles. Like I just can't wrap my brain around.
That's fine. I
something
mean,
that's
you've been
not
very
really
good faith,
relating
so
at all.
I'm gonna like assume that's how you're rationalizing it. That's fine. That was a really good conversation. I enjoyed talking to you, man. I
Yeah,
saw you debate.
Appreciate you hopping on to talk.
Yeah, for sure, man. Have a
Have a
nice
good
day.
one.
You too.
All right, so far we've had, I think, 4 really good conversations. So that's the type of conversations I'm looking to have: respectful, back and forths, minimal interrupting. So that was great. Let's see. Let me just make sure that YouTube stream is still going. Well, looks like it is. I'll go ahead and move on to the next guest. Hi, how old are you?
What's up? I'm 22 years old. I'm sorry. I'm 22 years old.
Okay, what do you think about abortion?
Well, I don't agree with abortion. I believe that abortion is fundamentally wrong because it's the unaliving of a human fetus and it's a human organism that deserves to live. Because I don't believe that you should be able to unalive human beings if they have some sort of potential impact on the world. Like, every single human being has the potential to be able to give something to the world. And if you're trying to deny human existence, basically something to be able to change society, I think you're doing something incredibly wrong. It's also immoral to try to basically take away lives.
Okay, so, sounds like we agree. It also sounds like there's some echo in your background. So is it okay if I move on to the next guest?
Sure. By the way, I see your videos. I think you're like the smartest person I have ever met of the right. To be honest, you see me even smarter than Charlie Kirk. To be honest,
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
God love you.
Okay, have a good one.
Fine.
All right, move on to the next guest.
Nothing works faster than Alka-Seltzer. The effervescent
I can hear a TV. How old are you?
I'm sorry, I'm 23.
Okay, what do you think about abortion?
Honestly, my thoughts about abortion are it's not I don't want to classify myself as like pro-abortion, and then again, I'm not really deep into politics. I just recently found you. I'm trying to just inform myself more with what's going on in everyday topics and stuff, but then again, I'm not a religious person, and I feel like a lot of people make their judgment on this purely based off of faith, and which I do respect people's faith. I grew up in church and stuff like that, but I don't think that we should involve, faith with politics. I am a big believer of that, and I do think that it should be, monetized in a sense, I guess, of like making sure that we're doing, safe practices in that sense. But I just personally, and I feel like other people too, I just don't feel that personal, moral, like it's not as morally wrong, I guess, in a sense to me. But then again, that might be because I'm not faithful. But then again, I do feel like I'm pro-life at the end of the day.
Okay, what do you mean by that? You feel like you're pro-life at the end of the day?
Because I feel like I just personally feel like that I just don't really see it as like human life yet, and especially in that like first trimester, I guess, like just from like a regular guy's, point of view, someone who's not really deep into this, I just don't feel like it's as like murder, I guess, like murdering a human being who's here on Earth right now,
Okay, just curious, would you agree with like the scientific literature that a human organism exists at conception, even if maybe you don't think it's necessarily a person or someone who's worth protecting? Would you at least acknowledge that like it is a living human organism from conception?
I would, yes.
Okay.
I would agree to that.
And so, is there a point at which you think? It sounds like you said there is a point at which you think it would be murder. Do you have kind of a rough idea of what you think that would be?
Especially like, I feel like just later on in the pregnancy, I've always heard, I'm not for certain, but I've always heard that, like first trimester, like anything after that, because then I feel like there's some moral, and then I think that it becomes dangerous at that point. Not only like, I mean, I think that it definitely needs to be, like the government needs to have, like monetize it, I guess, in a sense.
Just to clarify, what do you mean by like monetize it?
I mean, just, making sure that there's not abortion clinics out there practicing abortions after the first trimester, or,
Yeah, so like placing a limit on it or regulating it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to go back to kind of something you said towards the beginning, which was that you don't think we should be mixing religion with politics. The thing that I think is sort of incorrect in the reasoning there is ultimately everyone is going to have beliefs about the world, and those beliefs about the world are going to influence how they legislate. For someone who's in Congress or as the president, it's going to influence the way they act in their everyday life, what they think is moral or immoral. And so if we're going to have laws, we're going to want them to reflect what is moral and what is good. And in order to know what is moral and what is good, I think we would have to have an objective standard for morality and for goodness. And I think if we reject the existence of a God or the existence of God, then I don't really see how we can get an objective sense of what is good and what is evil.
Yeah, I can get that, but I mean, we live in a country mixed with all kinds of different religions too, So, I mean, those could cross over, and I just feel like, I mean, I'm assuming you're Christian, I guess. Like let's say you're Christian, and there's like another religion that maybe crossovers with yours, and they're involving that now in politics, since that person who got elected is that, religion. So now they're going to implement their religious beliefs like on you. In that sense, I see what you mean by like the morals, like I'm not a religious person personally, but I still feel like I have morals, and a lot of those morals I can find, in the Bible too. But that's without, having a connection with God, I guess.
Yeah, the thing is, it's kind of inescapable that we're going to impose morality, because every law is going to impose a moral decision on the populace, right? On everyone who's living in America. And so you are right that there is going to be competing sets of interest within the legislator, the people who are writing the laws. There's going to be people in America right now, there'll be people who are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and atheist who are all elected officials and are going to be writing these laws. But there will, at the end of the day, be one set of laws that is enforced sort of on the populace. So it's inescapable that we are going to enforce a moral code. That moral code could be Christianity, if it's the case that you had a bunch of Christian legislators who are predominantly writing the laws. It could be the case that it's based on Islam, if you had Muslims who are predominantly writing the laws. It could be the case that it's based on atheism, if you had predominantly atheists who are writing the laws. But there is going to be a code. So I just think that it makes sense, like if someone says that they're a Christian, which I know you said you're not, but I am, it would make sense that I would want to advocate for that being the code, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could understand that, but I mean, do you feel like your opinions on abortion specifically, like, is solely based off of your religious beliefs?
I think essentially all my opinions are going to be solely based on my religious beliefs. Essentially, like in the Bible, it's either you're with Jesus or you're against him, right? You're either going to follow what God has said or you're not. It would be kind of weird if I said, like, I'm a Christian, I believe that the Bible is true, I believe that it's the word of God, but I'm going to disagree with certain parts, right? And instead, if someone is a Christian, as I am, I'm going to look at the word of God and I'm going to say, okay, I want to align my beliefs with what God has spoken. So essentially, like, all of the opinions that I form, I would hope, are going to be informed from that worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I can respect that, but I mean, where do you draw the line, I guess, in terms of like I don't know, like Christian nationalism in a sense. Like I can understand, making certain legislative, especially, with states' rights and with maybe you have highly populated areas of Christians and highly populated Muslims and things just they want to make legislative acts, things like that. I can understand working its way, but what do you think is like the line, because also I'm not too knowledgeable of the Bible, but I've heard that it speaks about the dangers of Christian nationalism and like government too.
Yeah.
So like where's that line for you, I guess, like of when's too far, I guess, in politics?
Yeah. So I'm not calling for like a revolution or anything, right? I'm not
Okay.
calling for anyone to go violate the law or drastically change. There's like maybe like one change that I would want to the Constitution, but for the most part, America was largely influenced by Christian values and legislated Christian beliefs for most of its history up until really around like the last 70-ish years. So when people are using the term Christian nationalism, one thing that is important to know is that there's a lot of competing definitions for that. So like one person might use the term to mean that they want the church to literally rule the country or have like one single Christian leader basically acting as a monarch. And then other people are just going to argue that to them, Christian nationalism basically would just mean you add like an amendment to the Constitution citing that as a populace, we believe that Jesus Christ died for our sins, rose again, is God, and we're going to legislate in accordance with that. So something like adding the Apostles' Creed to the Constitution. So where I stand would basically just be, I would prefer that legislators are going to legislate on the basis of Christian values, but I'm not going to, argue for a constitutional amendment that says that you have to have like clergy holding the office of legislators. I think that our current system works rather well, right? I think that what I would prefer is to essentially see bottom up change. So I would prefer to see like the populace turn to Christ and then elect Christian leaders. Those Christian leaders work within sort of the current system to enact laws.
Okay. And just one final question tying back into like abortion
Yeah,
here.
let's try to go back there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're good. No worries. I kind of took it there. It was kind of my fault.
That's okay. But I guess, like, do you agree that abortion should be up to the states' rights?
That's a good question. So I would argue that it should be up to states if the 14th Amendment didn't exist. So like if there was no 14th Amendment establishing equal protection for all persons, then I would say that it should be a states' rights issue. But I think that since we have the 14th Amendment and it says that all persons should be equally protected under law, and I believe that like the unborn should be considered persons, especially like given how the term person was defined at the time that the amendment was written, I think that technically unborn children should be protected under the Constitution from being killed. And that would be nationwide under the 14th Amendment. But if that amendment did not exist, then I would agree that it should be a states' rights issue just because murder code in general is something that's left up to the states.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess one more, I kind of forgot where I was going to go there, but anyways, hey, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm learning a lot too.
Could I ask you a couple questions before we wrap?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned that like you do think that there should be a line somewhere, and it sounds like you think it should be somewhere around the first trimester. Is that accurate?
100%. I would definitely have to do like more research into like the safe practices of it, but I definitely think that like it shouldn't be late in the pregnancy where it's gonna hurt the mother, or I would definitely have to do more research on that to figure out like the dangers of like late abortions, late term. And I don't know, like at the end of the day, I think of like a girl, let's say like, especially like an underage girl or like that gets brutally raped or something like that. And let's say, and she has to drive, thousands of miles to get, like, I just don't feel like she should raise that child like that. That's just my point of view. And I think that the what might differ from you is just because of that religious factor that plays in your life compared to mine. And I don't want it to seem like that, because I don't want to seem like I'm a bad person. Like, I just don't see it the same way as you as like murder, killing a human being. Like, I don't think it's really a life yet. to be honest. Like even with the cells, because there's tons of like plants are living cells, organisms, but I don't value it. Like, like from just like a regular guy's point of view, obviously I think you're way more intelligent on this topic and stuff like that. But that's just my.
One thing that I think was interesting there though is like the use of a minor in the situation. And the reason I think that it's interesting when people bring that up is because in general, I think when we hear about situations like that, obviously our heart goes out to the victim of rape in that scenario. And the use of someone who's in a vulnerable situation and is dependent, largely like immature, 13, 14-year-olds, they're not mature in the way that someone who's 30 is, right? Someone who's 30 is going to be able to handle the situation of a unwanted pregnancy a lot easier than someone who's a minor. But what's interesting there is like that stories like that, they appeal to our desire to protect like the weak and the vulnerable. But I just think like if that desire is applied consistently, then it also has to be applied to the child in the womb, who's also in a weak and vulnerable and defenseless position. So I would say that if a woman is raped and she's, 12, 13, 14, surround her with love, care, and support, because we want to protect and care for those who are vulnerable and independent positions. But
what if she doesn't have that support? Go ahead. Like, what if she doesn't have that support base? Like, especially more often than not, people who are getting, sexually abused are coming from, homes that don't have a lot of support. So I just feel like it shouldn't be put on her. Like, she has so much life in front of her as well. And I mean, it's like, whether she's a minor or an adult, like, I just don't like. I feel like that would just be like a living reminder every day. Like, yeah, you would be like a blessing to have something good come out of the situation. And I do still understand your point of view of how like that child, has nothing. That's also like an innocent person. But I think I just don't see it as like as much of a life, I guess you could say, as like the mother, if you could.
Yeah, I think like the one thing that I would want to maybe push you gently towards is that we really ought to view all human lives as equal and as deserving the same sort of like dignity and protection. Would you generally agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so I just think a consistent application of that principle would mean that we also have to look at the child in the womb as an equal to the mother and to everyone else who's a human being.
I can somewhat understand that. Like, it's definitely like abortion is definitely one of those topics where like I just can't like figure out, I guess, because like in some cases it's just very like I want to hear about the case, because like I just don't want like a woman. And then again, like I just feel like if you do agree, we're better if it's just pro-choice. I feel like, because if you don't agree with it, then okay, like your values, we will respect that. You won't do that. But I do understand that you feel like you're advocating for like people getting murdered, but I feel like a lot more people involved with the church could advocate for like all of these mass shootings and like hunger and world hunger, like other things, other valued things that are talked about in the Bible.
Yeah, just one thing that I think is somewhat worthy of noting is every child in the U.S., I'll say like essentially every child, but practically it's pretty much everyone that is placed for adoption through domestic infant adoptions, like at birth, will get adopted. So like the typical process would be that if a woman has like a pregnancy that was unexpected and that is unwanted, she actually gets to take in like a bunch of family booklets from the parents who are wanting to adopt, and then select who she wants to place the child up for adoption with, like which family she wants to give the child to. So, I mean, when it comes to Christians and people in general, because not everyone who adopts is Christian, but many of them are, kind of stepping up and trying to fill gaps and help out for people who are in vulnerable situations. I mean, when you look at like domestic infant adoption, I think it's a great example of Christians who really are stepping up and trying to help these women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely, that's very respectable of them. I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like we don't view it the same as like as much of as like a murder in that sense of like murdering I feel like that would be different, like just comparing a fetus, like to a living human being and like murdering it, I feel like I would value that as like worse, I guess, at the end of the day. But it's not that like I don't want people to have abortions in that sense. I definitely don't think like I think like two, let's say like young people, you know, have a night out, make a mistake, you know, and they're find out that she's pregnant. I don't think you should have an abortion in that case. But I do know that people are gonna think very differently than me, so I want options to be there if they're gonna do it. And I would rather them have like a safe option to do it, I think, than to, you know, push to these illegal measures, like, and where it becomes inhumane for me personally. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one note on like the idea of like safe abortions is in 1972. So this was the year before Roe v. Wade was passed. The U.S. Center for Disease Control estimated that 39 women died obtaining illegal abortions out of 130,000. So like the actual chance of dying from an illegal abortion historically in the U.S. is like extremely low. That said,
When was this study taken?
this was 1972 U.S. CDC. So out of an estimated 130,000 illegal abortions, 39 women died. So out of an estimated 130,000, so like the actual like chance
Do you
of dying.
think that number would be higher today?
No,
than
I think
back
it'd probably
then?
be lower today.
Okay. I
But
just didn't know. I didn't know if that number would be higher today, just because I feel like back, especially then, I feel like it was definitely more of that. You had more people involved in the church, more religious values like throughout.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I misinterpreted your question. When you said, do you think that number would be higher today? I was thinking you were saying like the rate of deaths, like per capita, like per 100,000. It sounds like you're saying the number of illegal abortions, the number of people like violating the law to get abortions. I do think that the total number of women getting illegal abortions would be higher today than in 1972, where an abortion ban passed.
Okay.
But
All right.
just to clarify though, I also don't really think that we should necessarily be considering how safe it is for women to get abortions, because to me, from my perspective, you know, reasoning from pro-life from conception, that kind of reasoning sounds like it should be legal for bigger people to murder smaller people, because otherwise the bigger people could get hurt.
Yeah. I could see that point of view. Man, I really appreciate our conversation. I love hearing like your point of view. I appreciate how you keep it respectful too. I'm like a new watcher here, but yeah, man. Like I appreciate you having me on. This was great.
Yeah, I appreciate you hopping on. It was a great conversation.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too. Take care. All right, that was a good conversation. So again, we've had really respectful conversations so far. I'm actually quite impressed with the guests that TikTok has been giving me. We're pretty much 5 for 5 on great guests so far. So that's very good. Let me go ahead and bring up another guest here. Hi, how old are you?
I'm 22.
Okay, and what do you think about abortion?
I'm pro-life, man. I'm against abortion. I just had a question for you, or mainly two questions. The first question I had, that's kind of two questions in one. I was just going to ask, what do you take rights to be, and where do you think they come from? And then I had a second question, which I'll ask after you answer.
What do I take rights to be?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd probably have to think about that more to give like an exact definition. As far as where they come from, I would say that they come from God, the Bible, the created order, essentially. So I don't think that they come from the state. I think that that's the wrong way to view rights. I would essentially view rights as existing prior to the state and being the reason why we have a state in the first place. When I say state, I'm referring to like government in general. So as far as like an exact definition though of what a right is, I would probably want to think more about that to give like a proper exact definition.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I would just define them as like moral or legal entitlements. Maybe that's like a definition you might align with. But if you have to think on that more, that's cool. I just wanted to know how you define that. I feel like we've spoken before. I can't remember when, but I feel like we have. um, I remember seeing your debate against. Well, I saw you years ago on YouTube. I saw you debate recently against Charlie Kirk, rest in peace. Where you brought up the point about how women who have ultrasound still go through with the abortion. I think
Yeah,
you
a lot
were
of
the
the
one who
time.
argued that. Yeah, because I also am actually somebody who like agrees with you that I think that although many women are victims to abortion, I feel like sometimes a lot of pro-lifers almost disregard the knowledge and like forethought they actually have when they do the abortion. Like I think more people actually know what they're doing than people like pro-lifers often say. So I think it's important we make clear who's the real victim. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
Anything
Are
else
you
before maybe I
you
move
good?
on
Is
to
the
someone who
connection
disagrees?
poor?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think the connection was just pretty laggy, but I think it's good now. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it, man. But I appreciate you having me up, and I hope you have a good day or night. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Bye bye.
See ya. All right, I'm going to move on to another guest. Again, only request up if you're looking to have a respectful conversation, as all of them have been so far. So far, everyone's been doing a great job on that. Hi, how old are you?
Hey, 21.
Okay, what do you think about abortion?
I'm pro-life.
Okay.
And I specifically just had two questions. One was the specific, like, just how to defend a pro-life, like, ideology was, people, and I feel like you just brought up recently earlier to that other guy, Hunter, or whatever his name was. But I've been in this, like, situation where I feel like I didn't know exactly what to say specifically when they kind of do that, like, oh, there's this, like, this person that got raped, and like either it's like it's the safer way for this person to get because they're like a minor, like you said, and like they get like in that situation. How do I defend it as a person that's pro-life? How do I go at it with a sense of like, okay, I get it on like a stance where it's like bad is bad, and then do I put that towards bad because you have to save the kid, or how do I defend that as a person that's pro-life?
Yeah, I mean, I would essentially say that you don't want to punish the child for the crime of the father. As far as the medical complications go, my personal position, I shouldn't even say personal, just my position is that if in order to save the life of the mother, separating the child from the mother's body results in the accidental or unintentional death of the child, then I don't think anyone should be prosecuted. So I would support like a life of the mother exception in an anti-abortion bill. So if it is the case that continuing on with pregnancy will result in the expected and foreseen death of the mother, I think it would be appropriate for doctors to separate the child's body from the mother's body. And depending on the stage of development of the child, that might result in the unintentional death of the child.
Yeah, intentional death. I see.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should be prosecuted in those cases. And the bills that I generally refer to make that pretty clear. So like one that I often will refer to in conversations with people about life of the mother issues is the 2023 South Carolina Prenatal Equal Protection Act. That one has language that I think is pretty explicitly clear about if saving the life of the mother results in the accidental or unintentional death of the child, no one's prosecuted. So that's one that I refer to when people want kind of like proof that you can design a.
Can you tell me again? Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going off of what you said, just so I can know what specifically what were you saying?
Yeah, it essentially makes it clear that you can have a bill of equal protection that does include language that's explicitly obvious and abundantly clear that someone wouldn't be doctors and the mother wouldn't be charged with homicide or anything like that if saving the life of the mother resulted in the unintentional death of the child.
Okay, dude, I really appreciate that. And then my final question is this, like, I'm just kind of curious on if you agree with this. Do you think that the reason why abortion is just such a huge topic in the U.S. is that just because of our society as a society's thoughts on like where we are financially, like where I feel like to be like comfortable in the U.S. people think that they need a huge amount compared to like, let's say, I mean, this is why I realized I was like, let's take India into play. Like people are like really poor situations, poor society, poor, work from like, I mean, these crazy hour work weeks in India to barely get by, but they praise any birth, even if it's like not a marital birth. It's like, oh, you're having a baby. That's awesome. And so I've wondered, do you think that the reason why abortion is so prevalent or such a huge thing in the US is because of that, in the sense of like how we think in a society of like, oh, I can't support this baby because I don't have enough money. But then in reality, it's like, you can really, there's a lot of opportunities in the US. Like I don't know if you know this organization Preborn, which is like, organization that really does help actual mothers and people are in these situations that don't help. And so it's like, do you agree with that in the sense of like, is that one of the reasons why abortion is just like, I don't know. It's like, I just want to see what you would think about that topic, or specifically why.
Yeah, I mean, Americans today are far better off than they were like 80 years ago, 70 years ago, 60 years ago. So it's not as though we're in such an unaffordability crisis that it therefore would justify abortion or anything like that. I think generally the rise in abortions from, say like 1950, 1960, when it was illegal, to now is, number one, like largely a result that it's legal now. And I don't really think that it's that connected to affordability or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I always like wondered if just why it's so, I guess, it's such a big topic in the U.S. But that's all I had to say, man. I appreciate you letting me come on, and thanks for your understanding.
Yeah, appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too, man. Thank you.
Yep. Hi, how old are you?
Hello, 20, located in New Jersey, 2005.
Okay. What do you think about abortion?
I'm a pro. I would definitely lean towards pro-life. Yeah. No, matter of fact, I'm fully pro-life, but I do have a couple questions for you
Yeah, go for it.
that might be a little bit different from your opinions. Now, another pundit that I saw, Andrew Wilson, he states that even though he is also pro-life, he thinks in order for better political alignment, because the left exists, that would probably be best for our alignment, like our moral alignment, that we allow abortion on grave cases. And I want to hear your thoughts on that.
From a political perspective, he's probably correct. Just generally, if you support an exception for that, you're probably going to do better politically. So he's not wrong about the political calculation. My general position is it's important, like in conversations about what abortion policy should be for politicians, to distinguish between what like the morally correct position is and what like the politically correct position is, because they're not always the same thing. So like a good example is I think it would be reasonable for a governor of a state to take into account national politics if somehow an equal protection bill made it to his desk. So like suppose an equal protection bill passed the House and the Senate within a given state, so not nationally, but within a given state, and he's now looking at it, it doesn't have any exceptions. I think it's appropriate for him to actually take into account what the implications would be on the next like federal election, because in doing so, he's serving his constituents really as well as he can, including the unborn ones now and in the future. Because if he does the political math and he knows that if he passes this, even though it's just within one state, it's going to have such prolific consequences across the nation that in like 2 or 3 years, a Democratic president is going to come into office, and there's going to be a sweeping of the Senate and the House to go towards Democrats, and they're going to pass a bill that makes it so that he can't do anything in his state about abortion, because they'll essentially re-enshrine Roe versus Wade as law, and then he can't do anything. He can't do anything before viability. It would make it so that abortion would essentially be legal in every state at the very least until viability. Well, then he's just making he's not only making a political calculation, but he's also best serving his constituents, because in 4 years or 3 years, when there's suddenly people who are then pregnant, they're going to be probably a lot more likely to get an abortion if it's legal in his state up to 20 weeks versus if it was restricted at something like 6 weeks, or if it was restricted by shutting down all the clinics, and the person has to go locate, go to another state at a certain gestational stage when she can't just use the abortion pills or something like that. So I think it's fair to take into the to account the political nature of politics.
Yeah, that is true because truth be told, even though like let's say me and you, we're both Christians, and it's our preference that we legislatively vote towards what is pro-life, sadly the reality is not everybody holds those specific beliefs. So it definitely would probably, considering that, it would probably be the best political position to hold just because it can definitely compromise with more people, especially people that more so leans towards left on social issues.
Yeah, I do think though, even though politically it can be a smart move in certain cases, I do think that if a governor or legislator signed a bill that had that exception, that he or she should sign alongside it a public statement that abortion is just as immoral in the case of rape as it is in consensual sex, as in children conceived from consensual sex. So I think it's important to not mislead the public by passing a bill that has that exception and not putting out a public statement alongside it telling them that it's still morally wrong in the case of rape, even though politically we just can't get that done right now.
Yeah, so like this is actually a cool conversation. So do you think, considering that, like say like alongside, let's just say boom, we go with that view for like the state of Michigan, for example, hypothetically. Michigan goes for that state of view, but we actually add incentive, even though like a lady is raped, for example. Of course, it's very tragic, but what if we actually like incentivize the person to have the baby, like give them like actual incentive versus the option of give them the option, but give them incentives. Do you know what I mean? What's your thoughts on that?
I just don't think that would provide really any advantage politically. I don't think that pro-choicers would vote for anything along those lines because I think in their mind, they're not going to want to influence a woman's decision one way or another through governmental policy as to whether or not she gets the abortion. So I don't think that it would be helpful politically. Like, I guess technically pro-lifers might be able to get it passed with all the pro-choicers voting no. That's technically possible. But I don't know. I haven't thought of that, so maybe that'll be just something that I'll have to consider later. But my initial inclination is that no pro-choicer would ever vote for that, and it feels kind of weird for pro-life people to vote that into law, just given the fact that it is murder. And so now instead of like outlawing murder, we're incentivizing people not to do it. It feels weird. Granted, so does bills that don't completely abolish abortion. So like it also feels weird when you have a bill that ends all abortion except those in the cases of rape. But I don't know, that's an interesting hypothetical. So I'd have to probably think about that more to give a clear answer. But
Yeah, I understand you. Oh my gosh, I had one other question, but did I forget? Give me 1 second to think, and if not, I will hang up and let you move on to the next person.
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot, but if I like run across it again and you're doing another one of these lives, maybe I'll stop up and maybe I'll run it past you. But thank you for having me up. I hope you have a good day, all right?
Yep, you too. Have a good one.
All right, can you disconnect me?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Let me see in the TikTok chat if you've requested and you're pro-choice, then let me know in the chat because we've had a couple pro-lifers in a row now. So let me know in the TikTok chat if you've requested and if you're pro-choice so that I don't pick someone who is pro-life again.
Hello.
How old are you?
I'm 23.
Just real quick, it sounded like there was an echo after I spoke on your end.
Okay, I'm speaking. Do you hear an echo?
Okay, I think it's gone now. Yeah. So what's your position on abortion?
So I'm leaning pro-choice. I'm not fully passionate. I'm not fully decided, but I do have an argument. So
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
okay, so my argument is that not all life, including all human life, is equally valuable, and that is why abortion can be permissible because it's not all equally valuable. And I assume your position is that all life is equally valuable at all stages.
I mean, I don't even know if someone would necessarily have to have the position that all life is equally valuable. Someone could just have the position that all human organisms are sufficiently valuable to have a right to life.
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting you to say that, so now I don't know. Okay. So all life is sufficiently valuable.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'd probably go as far as to say that all human beings are equally valuable. But I mean, someone doesn't even have to hold that position to be pro-life. They would just have to hold the position that every human being is sufficiently valuable to have a right to life.
Okay, so what makes a human's life valuable?
That they're made in the image of God. That they're a human being.
Okay. Okay. So if you weren't a Christian, then would you still hold that perspective?
If I wasn't a Christian, then I don't think that there would be objective morality, and I wouldn't be arguing about anything, because I would have, if I wasn't a Christian, then nothing would really matter, right? There'd be no objective morality.
Right.
There'd be really no reason to believe that anything that is going on in my brain is any more important than a shaken up soda bottle, because it's just chemical reactions and physical reactions. And interestingly enough, I couldn't even know that what's going on in my brain is a chemical reaction or a physical reaction, because chemical and physical reactions don't produce truth. And so if all that's happening in my brain was a chemical or physical reaction, I could never even actually prove that it was a chemical and physical reaction. So yeah, if I wasn't a Christian, then would I be pro-life?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I wouldn't
No,
believe
I totally
objective,
get that.
I wouldn't believe objective morality exists, so I certainly wouldn't be arguing it with people.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's extremely consistent. Okay. So I kind of thought we were going to go down a debate of whether all life was equally valuable, but it's not even required for all life to be equally valuable to hold a pro-life stance, because it just needs to be valuable enough, is what you're saying.
Yep.
And a fetus that was conceived seconds ago, you think is permissibly valuable because it's created in the image of God.
Yeah.
Okay. So why? Okay, I guess I'd have to just go. Well, why do you think that if that something that was just conceived is created in the image of God?
That's what the Bible says.
Okay, where does it say that?
Genesis 1, mankind's made in the image of God. I mean, there's other parts as well. Genesis 9:6, I believe, also says that mankind is made in the image of God.
But how do you extend that to a point of conception? Like, how do you say that something that was just conceived is the same as you or me and mankind?
Yeah, so mankind would include all of humankind, which would include human beings at the point of conception, because they are members of the species Homo sapien. They are a member of humankind.
Okay. It's because where I struggle is seeing the parallel behind something that was conceived, like, say, literally seconds ago. Like, I see in my, worldview what I believe is it gets progressively more immoral the further into a pregnancy that it goes. I don't have a line that I draw where it's like at this amount of weeks or at this stage in its progression, but I do believe that the further you get into it, the more uglier and the less appealing it is. But I'm really struggling with just like, you just got conceived, and I don't know a lot about the process, but you just got conceived, and there's like a pill that you can take where you can, a plan B or whatever, and you can kind of, so to me it seems like it's a no harm no foul, like nobody's going to get hurt. The baby didn't develop at all, you know what I mean? I know that's not like an argument that I just said, but that's my stance.
Yeah, so
maybe if you want to attack that stance.
Yeah, I mean, to clarify, it sounds like when you say like no harm no foul, it sounds like your basis for harm would be something like sensations of pain or something like that, and since there's a lack of sensations of pain, there's no harm there, right?
Not entirely, but not entirely. I would say not entirely, because then I would have to say that you can come kill me in my sleep and there's no harm, no foul, because there's no pain. But I don't think you can come kill me in my sleep, even though it's not going to hurt.
Mm-hmm. So like, presumably if someone has a right to something, like when you're sleeping, you still have a right to live, then even if there's no physical sensations of harm, it would still be wrong for someone to take your life.
That's right.
But yeah. So like the way I would reason about that is, if someone has a right to live from conception, then even if someone takes their life and they don't feel physical pain, that would still be a rights violation. So the question would essentially be, when does someone's right to live begin, right? What's the point when that happens? So like from my view, that would be from the point that they are a member of mankind, which would be from conception. So I am curious, like in your view, like when would that right come into play?
Yeah, that's where I struggle. So when would the right come into play? When do you get human rights is your question. When do you get human rights? if it's not at conception.
Particularly the right to live, because human rights, different people have different views on like what a right is. So I usually just try to like make it specific, like right to life, because, you know, some people, I've heard this before. I'm not saying you would suggest this. I don't think you would, but some people will say like, well, we don't get the right to drive till 16. And it's like, okay, well, the right to drive is very different than like the right to live. So just particularly like the right to live.
For sure. Okay. So the right to live, if not at conception, when? I mean, I don't know, because I still don't think, I'm leaning more towards consciousness, because in my worldview, where not all lives are equally valuable, I have like a survival of the fittest worldview, where it's like, if somebody's going to get cut out the tribe for the betterment of the tribe, then that's just what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of it's like, I don't know what the word is to describe it, but it's a survival of the fittest worldview. So the right to live is associated, I mean, I don't want to say it's associated with value, because that kind of sounds ridiculous. Like, you know, you're still going to have the right to live even if you're not supporting the tribe per se. I really don't have a complete stance on that, so I don't know how much further we're going to be able to go.
Do you want to maybe go down the road of consciousness? You can even maybe say that, you know, you're not necessarily committed to that. That just might be, you know, somewhere that we want to go for the purpose of this conversation to keep it moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so I think the problems with that is, if we're saying that what makes someone a person is consciousness, then that's going to apply to a lot of non-human animals, which would mean that not only can we not, you know, take their lives for food and for, you know, purpose of maybe preventing damage to land or something like that, but we'd also have to drastically change like every single aspect of human life, right? So like roadkill, where we accidentally run over conscious non-human animals. Well, suddenly like our ability to drive on roads significantly hindered. Entitlement spending, government spending, that all suddenly looks a lot different, because if we're going to include non-human animals in the definition of person, okay, then do they have some right to like the funding that we have in government every year from our annual budget? So I'm just curious, like if someone was to say consciousness, you know, would you extend that to non-human animals as well?
I probably wouldn't extend it to non-human animals, because in my survival of the fittest selfish worldview, and I admit it to be a selfish worldview because that's what it is, it's me trying to progress myself first, humanity second. The animals only matter if they're at threat of extinction, regardless of whether they're conscious or not. So it's really only human consciousness I extend it to.
Mm-hmm. And like I'm assuming like the problem with causing animals to go into extinction would just be that, you know, maybe we just don't want that in terms of some sort of ecological argument or something like that.
Exactly. It'd be bad for me if that animal went extinct, because it would affect the ecological, you know, the food chain. The food chain is where I was going with that.
Okay. I mean, in terms of like the argument of like survival of the fittest and like go to the tribe, I think the problem with that is that kind of extends beyond like abortion to also justifying the potential taking of life of innocent newborn infants too.
Yeah, and that's definitely a hard stance to defend. Like, I'm not going to tell you that I want to live in a society where I can turn my cheek to like somebody killing their already born child. I don't want to say words that's going to get your life messed up. Sorry, but you know, I don't want to say that I'm like comfortable with tolerating that. Yeah. So I guess that makes my stance inconsistent.
Yeah, I think like one of the core differences between people who are pro-life and people who are pro-choice is if they value humans for what they are, for like what they can do. Like, so like what they can do would be like deploy consciousness or feel pain or have a heartbeat or something like that. Whereas like the pro-life position is just, we value human beings for what they are as human beings made in the image of God. So that's, I think, kind of like the key distinction between the pro-life position and most pro-choice arguments. Not all pro-choice arguments, because some people will argue on the basis of bodily autonomy or something like that. But for a lot of them that deal with like personhood, that would be kind of like the key distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've run out of road, but yeah, I was really hoping. Actually, never mind. I'll leave it at that. I think we've run out of road, but yeah, it was like nice chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on. Have a good day.
Yep. Bye bye.
Hello.
How old are you?
Hey, I'm 19.
Okay. What do you think about abortion?
I think that in the instance of grape, it should be allowed.
Okay. And so like all the other instances, you think it should be illegal then?
There are a couple that I haven't thought about super deeply. A big part of the reason that I'm talking about specifically this is because I wrote a philosophy ethics final on it, so I have a pretty developed opinion.
Okay. All right. Why do you think it should be legal in that case?
Yeah, so mostly it's the classic violinist argument, if you're familiar.
Yep.
So I can like hash out my own version of it, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think just using the violinist argument is perfectly fine for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think the problem with it is it ignores a couple things. Number one, the relationship between parents and their children. So in the classic case of the violinist, I would be being hooked up to a total stranger, whereas in the case of pregnancy, someone is gestating their own child. That I guess actually in the case of Grape, they didn't opt into that, but it is still their own child. So there is a difference in relationship. And I do think that parents, due to their biological relationship to their children, apart from consent or not, do have obligations to their children that they don't to strangers. So that would be the first difference. Another one would be the parts of the body that are being used. So in like the classic case of the violinist, I can't remember what part is it. Is it the kidney?
So I've heard a couple different versions of it. I don't believe that the classic case has any specific bodily function. It's just connected to the body.
Okay. Yeah. And then in like pregnancy, typically the parts of the body that are going to be used are those that are naturally there for the child, right? So like the uterus would typically be in someone's body for the purpose of allowing their child to develop. So there's a difference in like the parts of the body that are being used. In the case of pregnancy, even in the case of Grape, it's still basic care that is being provided to the child. Whereas in the case of the violinist, it's not basic care, right? When I say basic care, I'm referring to things that like every human being needs to survive and develop. So that would include like food, shelter, water, and being able to gestate in your mother's womb. That's something that all of us need. So the three main distinctions would be relationship, the parts of the body that are being used, and then whether something is basic care or extraordinary care.
Okay. All right. So to start with the first one, I think that as like you kind of briefly mentioned, like in the case of Grape, that it's slightly nuanced to use the point that like families have somewhat of a stronger obligation to their own members. So I kind of missed what you were saying with that. Do you mind repeating that or elaborating?
So, like I guess the key difference between the violinist and pregnancy could be summarized as parents, by virtue of their relationship to their children, have an obligation to provide basic care to their children that they don't have to strangers.
Okay. So I guess I would ask why that is. Like, how would you formalize that?
Yeah, as to why that is, I would essentially say, I mean, my ethical basis for things is essentially Christianity. So I would just say that, from the Bible, we can reason that parents have obligations to their children by virtue of their relationship to their child. One thing that's worth noting is if someone takes the position that mothers who are impregnated by Grape don't have a obligation to care for their child by virtue of the relationship between the mother and their child biologically, then if a woman is impregnated by Grape, doesn't realize she's pregnant, and then gives birth, and suppose like the father's dead, then suddenly I don't see anyone who is obligated to care for the child. If not the biological mother, then who? Even if someone was to say like society and government steps in there, well, it seems weird to say that the biological mother of a child, even in the case of Grape, doesn't have an obligation to care for the child, but everyone else does, or that they all have the same responsibility or the same obligation through taxes, because presumably the mother pays taxes too. But
yeah, okay. So I guess I would make a critique of like using the Bible and also distinguishing between obligations, morally speaking, to family versus the rest of like people that exist. Like I could point to the Good Samaritan, where it seems like there's a pretty strong implication that the Bible is saying to have moral obligations to not just the people that are of your own like kin,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, so that would be like good. What are commonly called like Good Samaritan laws would be, someone falls ill at your dinner, they need to stay the night till they can get better, right? Outside there's like a snowstorm. If you kick them out, they're going to like die or whatever. So I do support Good Samaritan laws, but there are lines like legally that would be drawn. So, you know, a Christian could say, morally, I want to love my neighbor as myself. So I would submit to the violinist scenario. I would allow myself to stay hooked up to him. But they could still draw a distinction legally as to whether they think someone should be legally forced to stay plugged into the violinist. So my position would essentially be, from a moral perspective, if I was in the violinist situation, I would want to love my neighbor as myself. Yeah, I'd probably stay hooked up to them. But from a legal perspective, I don't think that you know, people should be required to stay plugged into the violinist. But I do think that women who are impregnated by grape have a responsibility to their offspring that would make it so that the state can force them to continue to provide that basic care that parents are required to provide to children.
Okay, so I guess two things that I'd like to say. For one, I just want to be clear about like, so is like any of the moral claims that you're making going to be coming from the Bible or from what you think makes the most sense to have in law? Because I feel like I'm getting both from you.
Yeah, so like I think it's fair to say that biblically there are things that Christians reason from the Bible that they ought to do that they ought not be compelled by the state to do, right? So like a good example is with like welfare. Right. So my position as a Christian, when I read the Bible, I don't see, okay, you have to love your neighbor as yourself, therefore have government benefits. And we're spending like 38% of our GDP by the federal, state, and local governments. I would say, okay, love your neighbor as yourself. If your neighbor is struggling to feed their 10-year-old and you have, you know, excess funds, like, yeah, you can, you know, help your neighbor feed his 10-year-old. But it doesn't necessarily imply that the state must compel all individuals to do that.
Okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. So then the next thing that I would say is, even though you are biologically related to like a child that you would have inside of you, you're also halfway not. And I think that halfway not being related to that is like just biologically speaking true, but I think it's even more than halfway not if you think about like I feel that one of the important things with parents being obligated to take care of their children is that they didn't have to bring their child into existence. You know what I mean? They could have abstained from having sex and they did not have to put that child in a position where the child needed to have or receive care from the parents. Now, if you are talking about the instance of grape, however, the person that's pregnant there doesn't have that same sort of piece. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they didn't opt in. They didn't consent to the situation.
Yeah. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so one way would be, I think it's rather intuitive, and also I'd reason from the Bible on this, but I think it's rather intuitive that when someone has a biological relationship to a child, that implies more obligations and responsibilities than someone who's not. So like a way to think about this on the male side would be if someone is a sperm donor, or even say like they're not a sperm donor, but a woman like steals a man's sperm and uses it to impregnate herself. And let's say that the state is making him pay child support or help raise the child. Well, someone might argue that he never consented to this, right? He had his sperm stolen. And now the state is infringing on his ability to live independently and infringing on his liberties. But I think it'd be really crazy for someone to then say that because he's being compelled to do something he didn't consent to, he therefore has a right to kill the child.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. So I would say that, before we get to that, I would say like, I think that there's a disanalogy between what you just said and the violinist argument, because it's not just like, it's like the question isn't caring for them or like paying child support or not paying child support. It's being hooked up to your body or the other person dies. Oh, just for the sake of your live, or like what words am I not allowed to use in this?
Fine so far.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So do you see like the disanalogy that I'm trying to point out?
Yeah. One involves a direct connection between one's body and another, and the other doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one problem with that though is I could alter the situation with like the male. Let's suppose that the woman who he got pregnant, but his sperm was taken, used to impregnate a woman. Let's say that she gave birth to the child and then she died shortly after from like cancer or something. So now it's just him. He's being held, let's say, legally responsible by the state to raise that child for 18 years. So he's got 18 years of providing basic care to the child, food, shelter, water. I think that the total infringement on his liberty and on his bodily autonomy is at least as high as it is for the 9 months of a woman who is pregnant and then gives birth to a child. Just taking like the total area like under the curve of like infringement on bodily autonomy versus time. I think like the total area for like the 18 years is at least as big as it is for like the 9 months.
Sure, I'm happy to agree to that. But again, the alternative with that is the man just not taking care of that child. And I think that we would both be happy to say that they shouldn't legally be required to take care of the child.
But here's where you might actually agree with me. I think that it'd be fair to say that the man shouldn't be legally required to care for the child unless that responsibility can't be transferred safely to a third party. So like, I think we'd probably both say like, if that man wants to give up his child for adoption, he should be legally able to do so. But if there's a period of time in which he can't do so safely, he shouldn't be able to neglect the child to death, right?
Well, I mean, sure, but again, the violinist argument does have that built in, right? It's only you that can be hooked up to this violinist for the sake of their life.
Right. And so if the father in that case was, stuck caring for that child for 18 years, would you say that he should have to do it? Or do you think it'd be okay for him to say that he could just neglect the kid to death?
You're saying like if they, like if there wasn't any other option, like as
like
in the violinist case.
Suppose there was no adoption option for 18 years. Just like suppose like government outlawed it for some weird reason. They said like adoption never allowed anymore. Do you think that he should have to care for that child for 18 years?
If I'm following you correctly, no, I don't think that he should have to.
Okay, that would, just to clarify, in this hypothetical, that would result in the death of the child because adoption is not an option.
Right, yeah. As in the violinist case, I don't think that you are morally required to give up a part of your bodily autonomy for the sake of another person's life.
Okay, so to clarify, just want to make sure I've got this straight. So like a man who has his sperm taken from him and then used to impregnate a woman, he never consented to this. She nevertheless gives birth, dies shortly after. The state says adoption is not an option. You think that it would be acceptable for him to say that he's not going to care for the child for 18 years, resulting in the foreseen consequence of the death of the child?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would disagree with that, obviously. It seems like, yeah, I guess I'm not totally sure how to proceed. I guess any questions for me? I know I've kind of been asking a few.
Yeah, no worries. I guess how could you motivate that would be morally required?
By virtue of his relationship to the child, just like the woman who gets pregnant from a grape, by virtue of his biological relationship to the child.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, we just really do disagree with that on that because like the biological relationship there, like it's there, I guess, but like, that's like saying like I'm biologically related to, in the same way that that man is biologically related to his child, I would say that any other human is in a large capacity biologically related to that child as well. So at what point do we cut that off? And I think the point at which we cut that off is whether or not the person who is biologically related is like causally a part of this person's existence.
Yeah, so you're correct in diagnosing that we have different cutoffs. Your cutoff would be that the person has to be biological father or mother, and it was consensual. My cutoff is just biologically father or mother. right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. That's very strange to me though. Like the idea that it would be a moral requirement of a person to like give up their right to their bodily autonomy entirely because of something that was out of their control.
But I think part of the difference is in perspective. I think that you're largely looking at it from the perspective of the parents and the adults here, whereas I'm looking at it from the perspective largely of the child and wanting to place the child's right to his or her biological father and mother over the adult's desires to, have absolute liberty or close to that.
I mean, right. So I guess like I would say, like it would be great if there was somebody who was willing to volunteer and step up and help out in this case. And I think that probably in reality, something like that would happen. But even if it didn't, I don't know. Yeah, I think that we really do just disagree on that. I cannot wrap my head around the idea that somebody would be morally required to do something that might violate their right to bodily autonomy because of something that somebody else completely out of their control did. I find that to be like completely absurd.
I'm tempted to throw out something that I think is worth considering, but unfortunately, I know that people are going to take it out of context and clip it, so I can't do that. Unfortunately, due to our current state of political discourse. But is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, you know what? I'm happy to try to think about the other two things that you said, because right now we were just talking about like the biological connection. There were two other points that you made.
Yes, the parts of the body are different in the case of the classical violinist versus pregnancy. In the case of pregnancy, the parts of the body being used are those that are naturally there for the purpose of child rearing, for the child being able to develop safely. And then the second point, or the third point was, it was on a distinction between extraordinary care and basic care. So like me being plugged up to a violinist and bedridden for 6 months is not something that every human being naturally needs in the course of their development. Whereas in the case of pregnancy, that's basic care that everyone needs throughout their development.
Okay, yeah. So that third thing that you mentioned is an objection that I considered in my paper, and I'll pull it up to remind myself what I said about that because I don't remember off the top of my head. But to the second one of your 3 points, which I somehow forgot. Right, yes, the part of the body being used. So I would say that much like in the case of like let's say somebody steals a man's sperm and then there's this child, I would say that the man's bodily autonomy, it isn't like the specific body part related to caring for that child doesn't have anything to do with the birthing of that child. Do you know what I mean?
Not really.
Okay, so like let me try to clarify.
The male's body part?
Right, yeah, like we used the terminology that it was a infringement of his right to bodily autonomy to be caring for that child. So like we would say maybe the body part that is his entire body.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it's his time and energy, and that isn't exactly his body, but we can, draw that analogy for our purposes. And in that case, you were willing to make the same like moral argument that the man should take care of that child, but if you're willing to do that despite the body part that's being infringed upon isn't related to childbirth, then how can you make the argument that for a uterus being used? Do you know what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, ultimately, the man is using his body to provide basic care still. So there is still kind of that third distinction of basic care versus extraordinary care. And I think it's honestly fair to say that, a male's body isn't entirely for him. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that, I think it's still fair to draw a distinction that, my body as someone who can procreate and have a child, it's not entirely for me, right? Part of my body is also for rearing, maybe I shouldn't say rearing, for raising children, right? Ultimately, like any father is going to use his body, like all parts of it, to help care and provide basic care for his child. Whereas, I think it'd be a stretch to say that someone making my argument would also have to say that a male's body is to provide care to like a stranger violinist.
So are you saying that like the body part related there is in fact like morally tied to their to the child upbringing thing? Like that is what you're saying?
So I'm saying I think it's somewhat fair, like on the male side, to state that I think that like my body is not only for me to pursue pleasure or enjoy things myself, but also to carry out responsibilities that I have to my children, right? Like raising them, caring for them, providing that basic care. With the woman thing, I think it is like a little bit different. I think it's a bit easier to sort of see the parallel, because like when we think of an ear, we think, okay, that's for hearing. We think of an eye, we think that's for seeing. We think of a uterus, we think that's for carrying a child. That's for gestating. And then we think of like a kidney. We think of like, sorry, maybe you cut out there. We think of like a kidney or whatever the violinist is being plugged in, and we don't think the purpose of this is for, helping a violinist. But then on the male side, I think it is kind of fair to say like we think of like a father's body as in part being used for carrying out the duties he has to his child.
Okay, so I think I might get what you're saying there. I would say that for me, the important like moral consideration here is that like there is somebody that has a right to a thing and that's being infringed upon, and whether it's like something that is only used for a single thing or if it's used for something else, as long as it affects them and they have the right to have that not affect them, then that it's the same argument, no? Maybe I'm just not understanding what the like rebuttal being raised is.
Yeah, so I guess I'll try it one more time, and maybe if we still don't understand each other here, then maybe we'll move on to sort of like the third aspect of basic care versus extraordinary care. But essentially, like in the case of the woman, I'd say like the uterus clearly has the purpose of caring for the child, gestating the child, just like ears are for hearing, eyes are for seeing. In the case of like the father's body, I think it is fair to say that an adult male's body in part has the natural purpose of carrying out the duty of like raising and caring for children. Obviously not in the same way that a woman's body does, but in some respect. But it's pretty obviously not the case that like a male's kidney or whatever body part is historically used in the violinist scenario has an intended purpose of, saving like a violinist's life or interacting with a violinist's body.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, again, I really just feel like which body part is irrelevant. As long as a person has a right to that body part and they don't want to give it up, then, that is what it is. So, yeah, if we want to move on to the third thing, I pulled up the paper. I have it in front of me. Do you mind giving me just 2 minutes to read some text? Otherwise, I can.
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Yeah. So like your objection is that if I like misinterpret or paraphrase in a way that you don't think is very accurate to your belief, do call me out on that. But I would summarize the way that like the objection that you're making here. I would summarize it as something along the lines of every single person that exists at some point needs to be brought to term, right? So why would we like say, hey, sorry, man, it's been a long day. Do you want to just rephrase what your objection is so that I don't?
Yeah, so like the third objection was that there's a difference between an extraordinary care in the case of the violinist and the basic care that a mother provides to her child in the womb. The basic care being the care that every human being needs throughout the course of ordinary human development.
Okay. So I guess I would say that couldn't you call like I don't know, somebody gets sick at some point in their life and they need this like treatment or whatever. Like, do you call that also basic care because, you know, everybody gets sick?
No, I wouldn't call that basic care. So like basic care would be like food, shelter, water, gestating in your mother's womb. I don't think it would be basic care if someone needs like a $1 million cancer treatment. No.
Okay. So you just define that as basic care. Okay, so I'm realizing that the objection that I responded to in my paper is a little bit different. Okay, so gestation in your mother's womb being basic care. I don't know. I guess I would say that I don't think that basic care is like a moral necessity if like a person didn't like yeah, so I think it's that if a person isn't causally related to the existence of somebody and their basic care for certain things by virtue of their existence, I don't think that you can say that they're morally obligated to provide anything for them again. Right? I think that's all that it is for me. Like, yes, sure, like children have the right to basic care, but like despite that, if somebody isn't causally tied to that child's existence, they are not morally required to fulfill that basic care.
But then if no one is required to fulfill that basic care, then in the case of a newborn infant who was conceived in grape, if no one is required to provide that care, then there's no one to protect that child's right to live, and he could be neglected, resulting in his death.
Yeah. I guess, again, I'm happy to say that. I think that it is very fantastic that in our society we have some people that are willing to like volunteer to take care of infants that end up in that situation. But certainly I don't think that it should be a moral requirement that people who are not causally related to the existence of those basic needs fulfill those basic needs.
Okay, I think we might just disagree at this point, but it was a great discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Do you have anything that you could like point me to like motivate like the idea that somebody that isn't causally related to certain needs or certain rights, why they would be morally required to fulfill those? Like, do you have anything that you could point me to? Because like one of the times that I asked you that question was in relation to the like biological relationship thing with that first objection that you raise. And I'm definitely not persuaded by that.
Yeah, so
I'm also not persuaded by this third one either. So is there anything else?
Yeah, one thing that you could take a look at maybe if you just want like an indication of someone not consenting to a situation but still having a moral obligation there, would be, I believe there was a Supreme Court case in the last like 80 years. I don't remember the name, but it was essentially like someone went to close like a cattle deal or a deal for like some cows, and they were invited to stay for dinner, and then after the dinner was over they fell ill or something, and it was like really cold outside, and he asked to stay the night, but the hosts decided not to let him, kicked him out of the house, and as a result of that he had like some injury. He later sued them for not letting him stay, and I think it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that like by, even though the original arrangement wasn't that he would stay overnight, by virtue of like his humanity and the human condition, it should have been like morally required that they let him stay the night rather than kicking him out, resulting in harm to him. So that would be like kind of one last thing maybe you could take a look at.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. So, do you happen to like have any names tied to that? Because I'll just put it into my one of my tabs on my Google search so that I can find it.
I don't remember the name. I can quickly try to look it up.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I might have been wrong on it being a Supreme Court case. It looks like it might have been an Old English case, Sibbett versus Bing.
Versus Bing. Bing. English court case, you said.
Yeah. So Sibbett versus Bing, SIBBETT.BING.
Okay.
But with that said, I think I'm either going to move on to the next guest, or I'm going to wrap up for tonight. But appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I appreciate your time.
Yep, have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
All right. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. If you appreciated me hosting live, then consider maybe sending a super thanks if you're watching on YouTube, or you can visit my link tree, which is linked in my TikTok bio if you're watching on TikTok. For those watching on YouTube, I was recently told that my audio was too quiet. Was too quiet on my end, and it wasn't matching up with my guests. I tried changing that just now. So if someone can let me know in the chat if it's better now or if it still needs to go higher, then that would be helpful. So for those watching on YouTube, if you can let me know in the chat if I need to raise my volume of my mic to match that of my guests, then that would be helpful information, so that maybe in the next stream I can have them be more consistent. Okay, so try to let me know in the chat if I need to raise it even more. I raised it a little bit, but I don't know if it was quite enough. A little higher is needed. All right, if you guys can let me know how it is now, that would be helpful. Hopefully it's not peaking, but I did just raise it a little bit more. Yeah, so if those who are watching on YouTube can let me know. It does look like it might be peaking now. I might have raised it too much. So just let me know in the chat if I raised it too much or not. I can turn it down slightly if I need to be between where it was at the start and where it is now. So yes, just let me know, and then probably within the next 60 seconds I'll probably wrap up the stream. I guess I can probably go ahead and close it on TikTok. So for those watching on TikTok, thanks for watching. Appreciate it if you want to send a super thanks, or I have a buy me a coffee link that you can find on my link tree, which is linked in the description of my TikTok page. So if you want to support me there, would appreciate that. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream on TikTok. And for those watching on YouTube, it looks like people are saying that it's looks like it's good now. All right. With that said, I'll go ahead and wrap up the stream on YouTube as well. Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you want to support me, consider sending a super thanks or using my Buy Me a Coffee link, which you can find on my website, haydenrody.com,